Chapter 1272. In the end, under Chi-Chi's sister's protection, Xian was brought into close contact with the big camel. The camel felt strange when it saw Xian. It felt that he had the smell of its companions. It even snorted in a friendly manner. Xian was almost scared again. "Don't be angry. This is my good friend. You can also be good friends." Kiki smiled sweetly and gently stroked the hair on the camel's forehead. Seeing her and the camel's intimate appearance, Xian dispelled the fear in his heart. They didn't dawdle for too long. The children and the fathers all picked their own mounts and then began the desert-like journey. Riding a camel was a new experience. Not only could they suddenly rise high up in the sky and have a new vast view, but they could also enjoy the slow and magical ride. Ah! The camel took big strides across the sun-cracked ground. The feeling of being jolted made the little girl scream again and again. If they had only heard about it, the audience might have thought that the little girl was scared. But in fact she was not. The camera faithfully recorded Kiki's excited smile. Kiki felt that it was very fun and exciting. There were differences between a camel and a horse. The biggest difference was the high hump. Kiki looked and touched it curiously. Poplar fruit told her that it was the place where the camel stored its nutrients and energy. "It's amazing." Kiki giggled. "Kiki, look what is flying." Poplar fruit suddenly shouted and pointed to the sky not far away and said to Kiki, "It's Sun Wukong." Nuo-Yi excitedly lifted his retro red hat. The loyal fans of Journey to the West screamed, "Sun Wukong can fly?" Kiki pulled her father's hand in surprise. She felt that it was too amazing. How could there be so many magical and fun things in Xizang? From afar they saw Sun Wukong kicking his legs and flying in the sky. He waved his Jingu Bang and shouted loudly, "Fathers, babies, how are you?" His guess was right. This voice immediately gave him away. It was the village chief. "Hello, Sun Wukong." The fathers smiled and responded with their children. The children were still looking at the magical Sun Wukong in admiration. They didn't recognize that it was the village chief who played the role. In fact, only the children felt that it was magical. The fathers had already seen the flaw. Or rather, it was too obvious. The flaw was right in front of their eyes. There was a huge crane behind. It was that long arm that hung the village chief in the air. Only then could he ride on the clouds. The village chief finally landed. Like a monkey, he ran over while scratching his head. They thought he was going to do something, but they didn't expect the village chief to say, "Welcome to Where Are We Going, Daddy?" Sponsored by XXX. Just as he was reading the long advertisement, Nuo-Yi, who had already dismounted from the camel, clasped his hands together and bowed respectfully to the village chief. Village chief laughed involuntarily and said, "Nuo-Yi is worshipping me." The fathers all laughed. Seeing Nuo-Yi so pious, other than finding it funny, they couldn't help but be curious about his family's education. What kind of education could produce a child who held such respect for a mythical character? Kiki didn't say anything just now. She was leaning on her father's thigh and looking at the village chief in confusion. At this moment she seemed to have discovered something. Her big eyes suddenly became bright, like the purest black gemstone under the bright sun. "You are the village chief," Kiki said happily. "I know, Sun Wukong is the village chief who transformed into him." Haha. The fathers all laughed. So Kiki only just recognized the village chief? The village chief laughed. "How is it, children? Does the village chief look handsome dressed like this?" "Handsome." This was the answer of Sun Wukong's loyal fan Nuo-Yi. "Handsome. Super handsome." The eternal support Wang Xian and Dejun echoed. President Kong continued to maintain a calm and uninterested expression. "Not handsome, village chief. Why is there so much hair on your face? Are you sick?" A kind young lady went forward and gently held the village chief's hand. She helped the village chief check his hand. Luckily there was no monkey hair on his hand. Kiki's kindness and imagination were both amusing and likable. The village chief also smiled helplessly and comforted her. "It's okay, village chief isn't sick. It's just stuck on. It will be fine after village chief removes his makeup." "That's good." Kiki heaved a huge sigh of relief. Following that, the village chief lied and coaxed them. He described the terrible weather of Flaming Mountain to be extremely terrifying, scaring the children until they were stunned. However, if they wanted to escape from this place, they had to complete the mission. Therefore they immediately began to split into groups. However, this time the groups were not split by the village chief. Everyone reached into the box to touch the balls. Children of the same color and their fathers formed a group. Whether or not they could form a group with their fathers depended on their luck. Nuo Yi and Lu Yi were very lucky. They were successfully placed in the same group. Kong Kong and Lin Yongjian were in the same group. Zhou Shimin and Hao Hao were in the same group. Chi Chi and Hu Jun were in the same group. Yang Guo was in the same group with Dejun and Xian Xian. I want to form a group with Daddy. Kiki held Poplar Fruit's hand and looked up at her father in anticipation. Kiki was very happy when she received the pink ball, but now she was not happy. You can't do it this time because you chose to form a group with Uncle Hu Jun. Poplar Fruit squatted down and said to his daughter, so you have to be with Uncle Hu Jun. Listen to him and complete the mission together to find the puzzle. Then will I be able to see Daddy later? Kiki was worried about this. Of course you can. Let's work hard to find the puzzle and then gather here. Then you will be able to see Daddy. You have to work hard, okay? Poplar Fruit smiled. All right. The little girl regained her bright smile. She reached out her hand and clapped with her father. The little girl giggled and said, I will work hard. The mission was assigned. Kiki and Hu Jun had to find Master Ba Yi for the puzzle, while Poplar Fruit had to bring the two girls to Bajiao Cave to find the puzzle. I think my mission is quite suitable for Nuo Yi. Poplar Fruit smiled and pointed at Nuo Yi, who was eager to try. However, the mission was drawn by himself and this could not be changed. On the other side, Lin Yongjian patted Kong Kang's shoulder and said boldly, Kong Kong, since your father isn't here today, then I will be your father. He really dared to say that. Hu Jun was still standing behind him. The audience laughed heartily at this scene. Hu Jun was not to be outdone. In front of Poplar Fruit, he expressed his love for the little girl to Kiki. He gave Kiki a hood that covered her head with her thin jacket. The little girl's delicate and cute little face was exposed. She giggled and felt that it was very fun. She ran in front of her father and asked, Daddy, am I beautiful? Very beautiful. Poplar Fruit gave his daughter a thumbs up and smiled, just like an Arabian princess. Kiki did not know much about Arabian. She had only heard the story of the Arabian Nights. However, when she heard the word princess, the little girl beamed with joy. Chapter 1273. Poplar Fruit watched his little Arabian princess obediently leave with Hu Jun. After a while, he reluctantly retracted his gaze. Turning his head, Poplar Fruit saw the two boys staring at him. Now that Xian Xian and Dejun's father had left, Yang Guo had become their pillar of support. In the scorching sun of the Mountain of Flames, it wasn't that they had no one to rely on, but that they had no one to rely on. Okay. Poplar Fruit smiled. He snapped his fingers, squatted down and spread out the mission card. He said, now let's start our mission. Look at this map. Which one of you can tell me where our destination is? Xian Xian was in a daze while Dejun was confused. They both shook their heads. Xian Xian said in a childish voice, we don't understand. It doesn't matter if you don't understand. Come look over here. Uncle will teach you. Poplar Fruit knew how to pique the interest of such a young boy. He smiled and said, do you want to be heroes? Heroes are omnipotent. Reading a map is a piece of cake. So if you want to be heroes, you have to learn how to read a map from Uncle, okay? Xian Xian nodded. The two boys squatted down obediently and studied the map with Poplar Fruit. Their two big heads swayed in front of Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit had to change his position to continue talking to them. However, the map was very simple and the destination was indeed not far. Poplar Fruit explained it very simply and the two children immediately understood. Dejun said loudly, Uncle Poplar Fruit, I know. This banana cave is under that bridge. It's there. He pulled Poplar Fruit's shoulder and pointed to a dirt city hundreds of meters away. In the middle of the dirt city was a slightly white arch bridge. Yes, it's there. Xian Xian said happily. The two children had been a little dazed by the sun. Now, because they had found the clue through their own efforts, they suddenly became energetic. Then what are we waiting for? Poplar Fruit half squatted on the ground and made a let's go gesture. He smiled and called out, quickly take Uncle to find Princess Iron Fan. Then come with us. Dejun was very responsible. He was afraid that Poplar Fruit would get lost. When he pulled Xian Xian and started running, he didn't forget to warn Poplar Fruit. Of course you are my guides. Poplar Fruit smiled as he followed behind them. He carefully protected them and asked them to run slower from time to time, afraid that they would stumble and fall. When they reached the bridge, Poplar Fruit and the two children stopped. They took out their mission cards and compared them to the large Japanese-style house under the bridge. They asked, "Is this the banana cave?" "It must be." Poplar Fruit could tell at a glance. In variety shows, sometimes the map wasn't everything. You needed a pair of eyes that were good at discovering beauty. No, it was better to have eyes that were good at discovering cameras. In front of the house there were guns, cannons and several cameras ready. If it wasn't here, where else could it be? However, the two children were very simple. They didn't have that many thoughts and focused on completing the mission. Dejun and Xian took the mission cards and compared them for a long time before finally confirming, "Uncle Poplar Fruit, it's here. There's a bun on top of Banana Cave." Bun. Poplar Fruit couldn't help but laugh. The children's naive words were indeed interesting. The dome of someone else's building had become a bun in their mouth. Even without the Prince of Golden Sentences, Nuyi, the other children often said shocking things. "Since it's Banana Cave, let's go down." Yonghua held back her laughter and led the two children to the bottom of the bridge. They walked into the house known as Banana Cave. It did look like a house from the outside, but what they were about to enter wasn't a house, but a cave built in a small hill. No wonder it was called Banana Cave. Poplar Fruit realized that the small ancient city in the Flaming Mountain was probably a scenic spot built for businesses in the back, not a real residential area. It made sense when he thought about it. Within a radius of 1 to 2 kilometers, it was the unbearably hot Gobi Desert. There weren't many green trees in sight. It wasn't suitable for humans to settle down here. "There's a flashlight on the ground." Xian shouted happily as if she had discovered a treasure. According to its classification, this should be a camping lamp. It could shrink and gather light to illuminate the path ahead, and it could also stretch out to become a glow stick that shines a soft light and illuminates the environment around it. In the first season, Kimmy and Angela used this type of camping lamp when they were exploring the cave. After entering Banana Cave, Poplar Fruit stopped at the first corridor. The director who followed him stopped him. "Let them go by themselves?" Poplar Fruit was dumbfounded. Since they didn't need him, what was he doing here? Accompanying Prince to study? Of course, Yonghua only spat out this complaint and didn't care about it in her heart. However, Poplar Fruit looked at the dark corridor. He couldn't even see his fingers in front of him. He didn't know how long it was, how deep it was. He couldn't tell what was going on inside at all. Looking at the two children who were laughing and indulging in playing with the camping light, Poplar Fruit asked worriedly, "Can they do it?" "It's okay. Teacher Yang, don't worry." The director smiled. Since they said they could do it, then they could do it. There were two cameramen following them anyway. Poplar Fruit stood at the entrance of the corridor and watched the two children stumble forward. From time to time he would remind them to hold hands. They walked deeper and deeper and gradually their figures could not be seen. However, Poplar Fruit could still hear them cheering each other on. Although their voices were very soft, Poplar Fruit could still hear them clearly as they traveled through the deep corridor of the cave. "Maybe there's a demon inside. Then I'll be even more scared." "It's okay, don't be afraid. We're good people. They won't eat good people." Suddenly, Dejun's voice was heard as if he had discovered a new continent. "There's someone inside." Immediately after, a woman's voice was heard. "Old children, who are you?" Dejun had met Princess Iron Fan. At this time the two children were probably shocked. Even Xian, who was the boldest, had a trembling voice. He subconsciously replied, "Yes, who are we?" "Who?" The audience was amused by Xian's answer. Looking at these two brothers in distress, the audience suddenly had a brainwave and decided to give them the title of Who. This was not a coincidence. In the third episode, during the trip to Min Province, Dejun and Xian were given the title of Flattery. Of course, this was not a derogatory term. Who asked these two children to be so awesome? They could sing one another and make Sister Pomegranate smile from ear to ear? In this banana cave, Xian and Dejun were destined to offer even more incisive remarks. Of course, this was left for the audience to slowly enjoy. Poplar Fruit's mind was a little adrift. He began to worry about his daughter who had followed Hujun to complete the mission. He wondered how Kiki was doing now. Everyone can watch the dialogue in Banana Cave in the original episode. Xiaohan only briefly mentioned it here. Let's watch Kiki. Chapter 1274. It wasn't hard to find Master Ba Yi, and it didn't take long for Chi-Chi and Uncle Hu-jun to arrive at Master Ba Yi's magnificent house. However, just like Yanghua and the others, the long hallway was extremely narrow and dark. Especially since the front and back of the hallway was blocked by thick curtains, it gave people a feeling of suffocation. I'm a little scared. Will there be something scary? Kiki timidly tugged at Uncle Hu-jun's hand. The little girl was a little retreating in this completely unfamiliar environment. Listening to her soft and shy voice really made one unable to resist the urge to protect her. It's okay, Uncle is here, Hu-jun said loudly. Kiki tugged at his clothes and he also supported the little girl, afraid that she wouldn't be able to see the steps on the ground and fall. Fortunately, they quickly walked through the corridor. When they lifted the curtains on the opposite side, the faintly humming Uyghur music suddenly became clear. It was a dance music performed by Duder, Danbor and Hot Wap. It was very traditional and very pleasant to the ears. If one was used to listening to modern pop music, they would be in a trance when they suddenly heard this. But it was too sudden. Kiki was startled by the music. She had already taken half a step forward, but she quickly retracted her leg. It was only after Hu-jun comforted her that the two of them walked out. The musicians played and sang and the dancers surrounded them. Amidst this melodious dance music, Hu-jun and Kiki walked out and stood in a daze. They saw dozens of Uyghur beauties dancing in front of them. Their graceful waists swayed with light muslin, their slender jade-like feet nimbly stepped on the steps, and their white wrists and delicate hands flew like clouds. It was a magnificent scene of singing and dancing. It was different from the dark and narrow corridor just now. It was as if it was another world. The high dome, the bright light, the beautiful carpet covering the floor, and the exquisite satin hanging from the ceiling on the walls all explained the luxury of Master Ba Yi's mansion. Almost all of them were Uyghur beauties. Upstairs and downstairs, the big Kong bed facing the master's house was even more so. Master Ba Yi, who was slightly fat and stout, was surrounded by a few beauties serving tea and grapes. Looking at that arrogant mustache, this Master Ba Yi was not someone to be trifled with. Kiki watched in confusion for a while. In fact, the little girl really liked the dance of these beautiful big sisters, but when she came out of the dark hole and saw all this, the little girl was a little confused. Fortunately, Hu-jun reacted in time. He pulled Kiki through the crowd of dancing girls and arrived in front of Master Ba Yi. At this moment, the dance music suddenly stopped. Master Ba Yi, seated above, clapped his hands. Even without Hu-jun's reminder, the little girl followed suit and clapped her hands, but there was a hint of fear in her eyes when she looked at Master Ba Yi. This Master Ba Yi in front of her was not only a little boorish, but his behavior was also somewhat dignified, which made the little girl a little afraid. Hello, Master Ba Yi. We're here to pick up a mission, a puzzle. Hu-jun gestured. However, Master Ba Yi just looked at them in silence. The atmosphere was a little awkward. Especially the little girl, she shrank back to Uncle Hu-jun's side and leaned against his thigh, looking at Master Ba Yi in fear. Kiki, you should also ask Master Ba Yi. Hu-jun nudged the little girl. But Kiki was scared. Fortunately, the little girl wanted to complete the mission and then find her father, so she suppressed her fear. She nervously grabbed the zipper of her clothes and looked at this strange Master Ba Yi timidly. She said weakly, Master Ba Yi, can you give us the puzzle? Master Ba Yi's eyes were actually quite gentle. He waved his hand and said in a strange tone, learn how to dance from the big sisters. After you learn their dance and I'm satisfied, I'll give it to you. Is that okay? Kiki struggled to understand Master Ba Yi's words. Then she blinked and nodded. Okay, Kiki, you can do it. Hu-jun smiled and clapped for Kiki. In fact, learning how to dance was not a problem for Kiki. She liked to jump on the dance mat at home. She even taught herself many dances. Therefore, after receiving Uncle Hu's encouragement, Chi-Chi's spirit recovered a little. She giggled and gave Uncle Hu-jun a thumbs up. You also need to learn. Master Ba Yi pointed at Hu-jun. It was not that simple. Hu-jun was dumbfounded. He could act, sing and do anything. But to ask him to dance? Wasn't this killing him? Not to mention to ask him to dance a girl's dance. A big guy dancing that kind of dance. A little exaggerated. Wouldn't this scene be too beautiful? Do you also want to dance? Kiki asked Uncle Hu-jun curiously. Yes. Hu Jun nodded with a bitter smile. It's okay. Dancing is a very happy thing. The little girl comforted Uncle Hu and patted the back of his hand warmly. Since Kiki said so, then let's start learning. However, this dance was not easy to learn. She had to carry a large jar on her head to maintain the balance between her head and the jar. She also had to twist her waist like a water snake, and her feet had to step on beautiful footsteps. Of course, Kiki was so small that she did not need to hold the jar. Hu Jun could not escape this fate. The two of them first watched the big sister's demonstration. Chi-Chi and Hu Jun couldn't take their eyes off the Uyghur big sister's graceful dance. Although the Uyghur big sister was a little old and wasn't very beautiful, she had a different kind of charm when she danced. As she twisted and turned, she radiated the fiery passion of the Uyghur people. After the demonstration, the big sister stepped back and looked at Hu Jun and Kiki with a smile. She meant that it was their turn. You do it again. Hu Jun said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry with the jar on his head. The Uyghur elder sister smiled gently, then put the jar back on the table and said in a soft voice, "It's beautiful." Kiki was puzzled. Why did the accent of the Mandarin here sound so strange? Originally, these three words should be stressed at the end. However, in Xinjiang, the Uyghur people like to put the accent forward. This made Kiki unable to grasp what it meant to look good. It was very good. Or was she looking seriously? Hu Jun grimaced and nodded. He imitated their accent and said, "Oh, it's very good." All right, let's not talk about these language problems. Kiki was not her father. She liked to study language problems. The little girl paid more attention to the big sister's steps. Looking at the way she was staring at the Uyghur big sister, Chi-Chi was learning very seriously. Chapter 1275. After the Uyghur big sister finished dancing, it was Hu Jun and Kiki's turn. Seeing the 1.8-meter tall Hu Jun standing there with an awkward expression, the audience laughed wickedly. When would they have the chance to see the invincible hero Xiaofeng twist his waist and dance like a woman? Never. Therefore they definitely couldn't miss it this time. However, before Hu Jun, Kiki went first. The little girl, who had only seen it twice, wasn't very confident. She placed her hands on her head as if she was also holding onto a jar. However, she hesitated for a while and didn't know which leg to take first. "Little girl, follow me." The Uyghur big sister walked beside Kiki and said softly. There were benefits to the little girl being pretty and cute. At the very least, she could be taken care of by the big sister leading the dance. 1-2-2-2-2-2-3-2-2. The Uyghur big sister shouted the beat and began to twist her waist with each step. Kiki was also very serious. Her little face was tense as she looked at the Uyghur big sister's footsteps, but she still maintained her posture straight. Perhaps she had inherited her father's good points. When the little girl was doing something seriously, not only did she not lose her cute and gentle appearance, but she also had the charm of being serious and hardworking. The little girl also walked with the same style. Under the skirt, her slender and long calves turned into a model's elegant posture. Not only that, Kiki also noticed many details in the big sister's dance, such as the arm swing and the shaking of her butt. Although these small movements weren't done properly, she was able to imitate them. It was very cute. Oh, great. In the room, so many beautiful Uyghur big sisters clapped their hands one after another, applauding the excellent performance of the little girl who had just started learning. Kiki blushed and hid behind Uncle Hu Jun while giggling. The little girl's shyness just now had been swept away, but she was still a little embarrassed to be praised. Look at how shy she was. Under the contrast of the light yellow and light green skirt and clothes, the little girl's pink little face looked exceptionally cute. However, Kiki's performance was good. That still wasn't enough. Hu Jun had to pass first. Hu Jun knew that he would not be able to escape the torment of the production team no matter what. He gritted his teeth, closed his eyes and began to jump with the jar on his head. Her footsteps were a little exaggerated and enchanting, but her body was as stiff as a block of wood. Although there were no special effects, looking at Hero Xiaofeng's stiff steps and the way he turned left and right, the audience seemed to hear the sound of metal joints rubbing against each other. Hee. The Uyghur beauties all snickered. Kiki stood at the back and the little girl couldn't help but smile as she watched. She didn't have any intention of mocking him, but she felt that Uncle Hu Jun was very strange. She thought, is Uncle Hu dancing? How is it? Hu Jun jumped around, took the jar and asked. Too ugly. The Uyghur beauties waved their hands and laughed. Oh no, oh no. Master Ba Yi made a judgment. Hu Jun had failed and had to continue learning. Uncle Hu, let me teach you. The kind Kiki went up and held Hu Jun's hand and said. Under the patient guidance of Kiki and the Uyghur big sister, Hu Jun actually learned a very simple dance step for more than 10 minutes. With the big jar on his head, Hu Jun felt that his neck was about to break. His progress was minimal, but Kiki's dance was getting better and better. Because she didn't need to hold the big jar, another beautiful Uyghur big sister taught her how to wave her hands and how to twist her neck like a beautiful swan. She taught Kiki as a very talented disciple. Okay, I'll bring my daughter with me one last time, okay? Hu Jun's son was snatched away by Lin Yongjian, and now he took on the responsibility of recognizing Kiki as his daughter. Kiki giggled, and the little girl who was having fun didn't care about this. Then let's dance. However, Hu Jun's body was still a little stiff. After he finished dancing, he turned around and his hand slipped. The big jar fell from his hand and shattered on the ground. Luckily, it fell on the other side. Kiki, who was also standing beside Hu Jun, wasn't hit, and was also lucky enough not to be cut by the flying shards. She retracted her hand and was shocked. Knowing that Uncle Hu Jun had caused a big trouble, the little girl subconsciously raised her head and looked at the master. She looked at the originally very serious and fierce Master Ba Yi. The little girl took a deep breath and said in her heart, "This is bad." Luckily, Uncle Hu Jun was here. Uncle Hu Jun was still very reliable, and Kiki wasn't scared to the point of crying. However, Hu Jun was scared out of his wits. He turned around and carried Kiki and carefully checked her. After confirming that the little girl was fine, he was relieved. They couldn't dance for the time being. Hu Jun and Kiki sat by the Kong bed and waited for the staff to clean up the broken shards and debris on the ground. A beautiful Uyghur big sister plucked a bunch of grapes for Kiki to eat. So sweet. It's super delicious. After Chi-Chi ate it, she smiled happily. The haze of breaking the jar earlier was swept away. She even turned around and raised her small arm to grab a grape and stuffed it into Hu Jun's mouth, saying, "Uncle Hu, you should try it too." However, it wasn't that simple. This Master Ba Yi was very dedicated to carrying out the program's concept of tormenting the guests. He turned his head and held back his laughter. Instead, he looked at Hu Jun with a fierce look and said, "How are you going to compensate? How are you going to compensate?" Hu Jun, who was a wily old fox, asked with a smile. Kiki was nervous for a while, but Hu Jun was a dead pig that wasn't afraid of boiling water. The punishment was very simple. Hu Jun had to dance with the many Uyghur beauties, and Kiki had to stand behind Master Ba Yi obediently with a cattail leaf fan and fan him. Since they had already danced for half an hour, Hu Jun didn't mind dancing one more time. This time he didn't have to hold the jar. Hu Jun immediately felt that his hands were freed, and he was very engrossed in dancing with the beauties. Little Princess Kiki, who had been reduced to a fanning palace maid, was dutifully fanning the cattail leaf fan. However, he was just about to praise her. The little girl was distracted. She looked at Uncle Hu Jun's strong and gentle dance moves, and the little girl couldn't help but purse her lips and smile. In this brightly colored room, people were either dressed in gold, bright red, or charming purple. Chi-Chi's light yellow dress added a bright freshness to the thick ink and color, and her smile was even more so the purest scenery in the adult world. However, the fan was unknowingly crooked. Kiki subconsciously fanned herself, but she didn't realize that she was fanning the air. After the dance, Hero Xiaofeng was so tired that he bent over. "I'm very satisfied." Master Ba Yi stood up and praised. Finally, the mission was completed. Chi-Chi and Hu Jun also obtained the puzzle pieces in the end. Hu Jun, who had been tortured quite a bit, was panting. He pointed at Master Ba Yi and mocked him, "If you're not satisfied, I'll die." Chapter 1276. We won. After leaving Master Ba Yi's mansion, Chi-Chi held Uncle Hu Jun's hand with one hand and tightly gripped the jigsaw puzzle she obtained from Master Ba Yi with the other and smiled happily. "Yes, we finally won." Hu Jun, who had a hard time dancing, wiped the sweat on his forehead and said with a smile, "Shall I send you to your father?" Yes, I miss Papa." The little girl nodded happily. "Miss, where are they now?" Hu Jun asked the staff member who was following them. "Teacher Yang's team hasn't completed the task yet." The staff member asked his colleague through his mobile phone and said, You can go to the assembly point and wait for them. Okay then. Chi-Chi, who was in a good mood, didn't pay too much attention to this short wait. She pulled Uncle Hu-jun's hand and skipped around, humming the Uyghur dance song from earlier as they walked towards the gathering place together. However, halfway there, the staff member received a notice that Lin Yongjian and Kong Kong, who had gone to climb the flaming mountain, had completed the task. Hu-jun missed Kong Kong very much, just like how Kiki missed her father. He wanted to rush to his son's side immediately to welcome him. After all, Kong Kong was going to complete the most difficult of the 5 missions, which was to climb the Mountain of Flames. The mountain was so high. Although the steps to climb the mountain were not steep, looking at the scorching hot weather and climbing under the scorching sun, even the spectators themselves felt uncomfortable, let alone a child who was not even 7 years old. Kiki, I'll send you to the assembly point first and then I'll pick up Konger. Hu-jun was a little hesitant because he still had Poplar Fruit's daughter with him. Unexpectedly, Kiki waved her hand obediently and said, "It's okay. Let's go and pick up brother Kong Kong. It's very hot there." Hu-jun said, "I'm afraid you'll get sunburned." "Hee, Uncle Hu, you don't have to worry about me." Kiki shook her cute little umbrella, which had an extra ear in the middle, and said, "I have an umbrella." Thus they changed their route and walked towards the flaming mountain. Fortunately, they walked in a place with a thatched shelter. Although it was hot, they were not directly exposed to the sun. However, the mountain was too tall and huge. Hu-jun couldn't help but walk out of the straw hut. He stretched out his palm and looked in front of his eyebrows like Sun Wukong. Kiki also looked up, but the little girl didn't know how to use her hands to cover her eyes. The sun was so bright that she had to squint her eyes. Later, she couldn't stand it anymore and went to hide in the straw shed. "Where is it?" "Hu-jun." 2 shouts came from afar. It turned out to be Lin Yongjian and Kong Kong. They were standing on a viewing platform in the middle of the mountain path, shouting loudly. Kong Kong followed Lin Yongjian and called his father by his name. "We got the jigsaw puzzle." The 2 of them shouted excitedly. "There's no mountain of fire that we can't cross." Kiki came to her senses and walked out to take a look. She happily stretched out her white and tender hand and pointed into the distance. "I see him. Big brother Kong Kong is over there." Hu-jun also shouted and responded enthusiastically to his son. Kong Kong and Lin Yongjian started to walk down, but Hu-jun just stood there with his hands on his waist and waited. The photographer asked softly, "Are you going to pick him up?" Hu-jun didn't move. He was very calm and said coolly, "Let him walk from the beginning to the end." He finally understood where Kong Kong learned his cold personality from. Look at the 2 of them, their tempers were the same. It was just that Old Hu had a few more decades of experience than Little Hu, so he was slightly more tactful. However, after a while Old Hu regretted it. He turned to Kiki and said, "Kiki, you stay here with your sister. I'll go up and take a look." "I want to go too." Kiki excitedly followed behind with her little umbrella. "Didn't you just say that you don't want to pick him up?" the photographer asked. Hu-jun's heart actually softened. As he walked, he said, "After thinking about it, I still want to pick him up." The distance was actually quite far. Hu-jun walked for a long distance before he broke free from his longing for his son. He turned to look at Kiki. The little girl had been trying her best to follow behind him. She wore a dress and held a small umbrella. She looked like a virtuous lady on a trip. Unfortunately, this place wasn't a scenic place. Kiki's face was also red from the heat. The sweat on her cheeks made her hair stick. She kept wiping her sweat, but it was to no avail. "It must be tiring, right? Uncle will carry you," Hu-jun said guiltily as he squatted down. No need." The little girl waved her hand and smiled brightly. "I can do it. Aren't you tired? Look at your blushing face." Hu-jun asked in surprise. "I'm not tired. It's just a little hot." Kiki mischievously smiled and stuck out her tongue. Hu-jun held Kiki's hand and climbed up a few steps before they finally saw Lin Yongjian and Kong Kong, who had just come down the mountain. Lin Yongjian was panting heavily as he carried Kong Kong and walked towards them. The photographer and assistant were also holding umbrellas and following closely behind them. It turned out that at the end of the mountain, Kong Kong had a nosebleed because he had been in the sun for too long. The assistant upstairs had already taken care of it. The nosebleed stopped, but there was still a piece of paper stuffed in his nostrils. How come a nosebleed? Hu-jun heard the news on the way down. He smiled as he took his son and patted him on the back. "Are you okay?" N. Kong Kong was in his father's arms. He saw the beautiful girl holding a small umbrella curiously sizing him up. The little boy felt embarrassed and turned his head to the other side. He said in a muffled voice, "I'm fine." He quickly walked to a small courtyard not far away and found a shady place for Kong Kong to rest. Brother Kong Kong's face is so red. It's so hot. Kiki said as she sat next to Brother Kong Kong and watched the show's doctor examine Kong Kong again and again. She reached out and touched Kong Kong's face gently. Kong Kong's face was indeed red. The originally tan little boy's face was now pink. Of course, it was not because of shyness, but because of the heat poison he had absorbed on the mountain. "Your face is red too," Kong Kong said. He reached out his hand, but the little boy was more shy and retracted it. He pretended to be calm and said, "Touch it yourself." That's right, Kiki's face was also red. The two of them were comparable. However, Kiki's condition was better because her skin was very white. It was easy for her to turn red from the heat. The little girl touched her face obediently, then made a funny face at Brother Kong Kong and giggled. It was not easy to get a chance to interrupt the two children while they were playing. Old Who could not help but feel proud of his son. He praised, "Teacher Lin said that you guys climbed up the mountain just now? It's amazing, really amazing." "I did it." Kong Kong calmly leaned on her father's side and said in a carefree manner. Although Hu Jun still had a calm smile on his face, he couldn't hide the love he had for his son in his eyes. Old Hu praised his son while wiping his sweat. Kong Kong had been sitting for so long, but his body was still sweating profusely. Even his feet were sweating profusely. Chapter 1277. After all, a child was a child full of vitality. After resting for a while, Kong Kong regained her vitality. When she heard Hu Jun and Lin Yongjian talking about Kong Kong's deeds of climbing the flaming mountain, Kiki's heart was full of respect for this little brother. He was so amazing that he even climbed the flaming mountain. Therefore, on the way to the rendezvous point, Kiki let Brother Kong Kong hold her hand, and then she kept asking Brother Kong Kong questions about the flaming mountain like a curious baby. "Papa." However, when they arrived at the rendezvous point, the little girl saw her father from afar and immediately let go of Brother Kong Kong's hand. She was like a little wild horse running happily on the grassland, running over to her father and throwing herself into his arms. "You're back." Poplar Fruit also smiled and picked up his daughter. When he heard that Hu Jun took his daughter to the flaming mountain, Poplar Fruit was also a little anxious and worried. "Papa, I missed you so much." Kiki hugged her father's neck and smiled sweetly. "I missed you too." Poplar Fruit hugged his daughter tenderly and patted her back. He smiled and said, "Were you very obedient just now? Did you listen to Uncle Hu's words?" "Yes." Kiki suddenly remembered and took out a big piece of the puzzle from her jacket pocket and showed it to her father. "Papa, look, we also got the puzzle." "Really? You're awesome." Poplar Fruit smiled and gave his daughter a thumbs up. Kiki giggled and then came down with her friends to put the puzzle together with satisfaction. Puzzles were Kiki's strong point. Poplar Fruit bought her puzzles before, so the little girl's eyesight was better than Poplar Fruit's. Not to mention this very simple puzzle with 5 pieces. Like this. Kiki took the puzzle from her friends and put it together excitedly. "Sister." Xian Xian suddenly thought of something. He turned around and took the quest reward from his father. It was a long, polished jade necklace. Of course, it was not pure Hetian jade. It was just some worthless corners of the gobi material. It was dark in color and looked more like stone. At that time, with the help of the Lord Xian Xian, Dejun and Nu Yi, who had rushed over after completing the mission, were lucky enough to receive a gift from Princess Iron Fan. Nu Yi gave it to his father while Xian Xian said without hesitation, "I want to give it to my Kiki." Poplar Fruit just laughed at the side. It was funny, but there was nothing he could do. "Sister Kiki." At this moment, Xian Xian happily extended the necklace in front of Sister Kiki and said, "This is for you." However, Chi-Chi didn't appreciate it. Or rather, the little girl was busy and didn't have the time to look at this thing in front of her. She turned to look at Xian Xian and said with some dissatisfaction, "Xian Xian, I'm putting together a puzzle." After that, the little girl buried her head and looked at Kong Kong and Nui. Soon the puzzle was completed. However, Xian Xian, who was rejected by Sister Kiki, walked to the side dejectedly. His little hand was dragging the necklace. He He was in a bad mood and was in pain. Presumably, there would be an Eru morning song in the program. Papa, look, we finished it. The little girl immediately came over and pulled her father's hand, asking him to see her work. That's a map. And where's Papa going? Is that so? You guys are awesome. Poplar Fruit smiled. He squatted down and let his daughter lean on his chest. He pointed at Xian Xian and said, Kiki, look, you shouted at Xian Xian just now. Xian Xian is very sad. I didn't shout at him. Kiki scratched her head. She was so focused on putting together the puzzle that she didn't notice Xian Xian's mood. The little girl decided to go up and see her good friend after hearing her father's words. Xian Xian. Kiki walked to Xian Xian's side. She didn't know where to put her two little hands, so she could only hold each other in front of her. The little girl looked down at the depressed little brother and asked with some apprehension, Xian Xian, are you angry? Xian Xian shook his head. In fact, at this moment Sister Kiki was able to come over and talk to him so gently. Most of his sadness had dissipated. Xian Xian, it was my fault. Kiki learned from her father that, take a step back and you will be able to see the world. She took the initiative to apologize. Can you forgive me? Xian Xian was also a vitality little boy. He immediately opened his mouth and smiled happily, saying, I have already forgiven you. Not only that, the vitality little boy immediately changed his mode and turned around. He was so shy that he didn't dare to look at Sister Kiki. He then raised his hand and handed the necklace to Sister Kiki. He said softly, Sister, this is for you. Wow, it's so beautiful. Kiki praised. She was pleasantly surprised when she received the necklace and looked at it carefully. This is what I got from doing a mission. After Xian Xian gave the gift, he looked at his father shyly. He received encouragement from his father before he continued. Do you like it? Xian Xian raised his head and found that Kiki had already run away. Papa. Xian Xian said that he wanted to give this to me. Kiki handed the necklace to her father and then said with sparkling eyes. He said that he got it from doing a mission. I think it's so beautiful. In the past, there was a student who wanted to find Kiki to save the country. Poplar Fruit was very unhappy and scolded her. If someone gave a gift in private, she had to get her father's approval before she could accept it. Therefore, in order to not make her father angry, Kiki ran back to let her father know. At this time, Kiki's eyes were filled with expectation and worry. She was worried that her father would not let her accept Brother Xian Xian's gift. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, It's a very beautiful necklace. Did you say thank you to Brother Xian Xian? Not yet. Kiki immediately turned around and said thank you to Xian Xian who just came over. You're welcome. Little fatty Xian beamed with joy. Although it was a program, Poplar Fruit still put the necklace on Kiki himself. The long jade necklace hung in front of her body, as if the little princess was wearing her pearl necklace from the East Sea. She suddenly became more beautiful. It was getting late. Everyone got back into the car and went to the real grape ditch this time. The grape ditch was located next to the Flaming Mountain. Compared to the Flaming Mountain that stretched as far as the eye could see, the grape ditch was simply a paradise on earth. Green and lush grape groves, grape trellis everywhere, and beautiful oasis scenery everywhere. This was a real village where humans lived. Dad and the children all came to the Green Frog Alley and came to the new gathering place. A large courtyard with grape trellises shrouded the entire courtyard in cool green shade. However, they were a little puzzled. Why hadn't they chosen a house after such a long time? Chapter 1278. I like it here. The little girl sat on the heatable brick bed and leaned on her father's thigh. She squinted her eyes and smiled. It's so comfortable, wasn't it? Compared to the hot environment of the Flaming Mountain, the shade and greenery brought by the grapevines here and the cool breeze blew. It was heaven on earth. Chi-Chi had already taken off her sunscreen. Her light yellow dress was cool and comfortable, but the slight redness on her face from the sun had yet to dissipate. At this time, a staff member brought up many thin and thick pieces of watermelon. They were bright red and looked especially sweet and delicious. Xian Xian and Mini Xian. How the two foodies could not take their eyes off the watermelons. Poplar Fruit also heard his daughter swallow her saliva. On a hot summer day, the cold and sweet watermelons were definitely the best way to relieve the heat. Just like how the village chief boasted when he took a bite, everyone couldn't wait to eat to their heart's content. "Do you want to eat?" the village chief asked temptingly as he ate. Of course they wanted to eat. Was there a need to ask? However, the fathers had experienced 2 trips and understood that there was no such thing as a free lunch. They were indifferent even when the watermelons were placed in front of them. It was not that simple. And then, Jun sneered and asked, "Why are you all so cautious?" The village chief laughed. Everyone was not just thinking about eating like in the first episode. "You must have something on your mind," Lin Yongjian said with a smile. He and Jun were both veterans and were much older than the people present. They weren't afraid of provoking the village chief a little. Poplar Fruit and the rest laughed. Everyone had already figured out the show's routine. However, the children did not understand, or rather, did not pay attention to what the fathers were saying. They were still staring at the watermelons on the table. It turned out that the watermelons were all props for the house selection. The rules of the game were very simple. They were often seen in Korean variety shows. After eating a watermelon, they would spit out the seeds and stick them on their faces. However, the real competition was not whether the seeds could stick, but who could stick the most seeds on their faces within 3 minutes. The children could help, but the adults and children could not use their hands. After the game ended, the father with the most seeds on his face could choose the house first. What else was there to say? Let's fight for the house. No wonder this watermelon has so many seeds. Poplar Fruit secretly complained in his heart. He was not in a hurry to compete. He first told his daughter, "Kiki, if you want to eat watermelon, then eat it. But be careful, don't eat the watermelon seeds." "Papa, do you need my help?" the little girl asked eagerly. Kiki had a good heart, but this watermelon had too many seeds. Poplar Fruit didn't want to distract the little girl. This was the first time she had eaten a watermelon with so many seeds. Most of the watermelons sold in the city were seedless, and Poplar Fruit hadn't helped her pick one yet. After instructing his daughter, Poplar Fruit began to eat the watermelon with his head tilted back. After collecting enough watermelon seeds, he spat them out like a fountain. Even though it was Poplar Fruit, he couldn't handle the watermelon seeds that flew out of his mouth. Fortunately, he ate quickly and spat out a lot of watermelon seeds at once. Many of them stuck to his face. Catch up. Poplar Fruit was secretly happy. Without thinking much, he quickly continued to eat the watermelon and spit out the seeds. Beside him, Kiki also finally ate the watermelon. The little girl was quite fastidious. She carefully nibbled on the part of the watermelon without seeds and then ate it in small bites. This watermelon had a lot more seeds than the last time in Min Province, but this didn't affect the quality of the watermelon. It was super sweet, so sweet that there was sand in it. Kiki spat out the watermelon seeds on her hand and threw them away. She ate happily and was very satisfied. However, unlike Chi-Chi, who was as quiet as a little lady, the other children were all fighting with their fathers. Spittle flew everywhere and melon meat was thrown everywhere. It was like a play of 100 forms of life, and every father's face was too horrible to look at. Kiki ate for a while before she noticed the noise around her. The little girl turned to look at her friends and found that they were all busy spitting on their fathers' faces. What's going on? Kiki stood up curiously, still holding a piece of unfinished watermelon in her hand. She swayed to take a look. Ah! The little girl was shocked. How did these uncles become so ugly? Or rather, disgusting. There were a lot of watermelon seeds on their faces. Looking at them made one's scalp tingle. Kiki turned her head and hid behind her father. The little girl really couldn't accept it at the moment. Ah, Papa, what's wrong with you? However, when she turned her head, the little girl screamed again. How did Papa become like this? It seemed that the little girl had been drooling while looking at the watermelon and didn't pay attention to what the village chief said. The little girl was shocked at first and subconsciously wanted to run away. However, she quickly realized that this was her father. She had to save her father. The little girl became anxious. She threw the watermelon aside and then slapped her face with her 2 small hands like a cat's claws. The watermelon seeds on her father's face flew everywhere. She also turned her head to the side and closed her eyes, screaming again and again. It could be seen that this was the first time the little girl came in contact with such a terrible side of her father. However, the watermelon seeds that Poplar Fruit had painstakingly collected for almost 2 minutes were swept to the ground by Kiki. Seemed like a long time, but it happened in an instant. Even Poplar Fruit didn't have time to react. When he grabbed his daughter's little hand, His face was almost as clean as a mirror. This scene, the audience was somewhat surprised. Poplar Fruit was a little depressed, but Kiki saw that her father's face was clean again. She suddenly plunged into Poplar Fruit's arms and said happily, "Papa, you're not sick. I was scared." What a little fool. Poplar Fruit had to spend a little more time to explain to Kiki what was going on. "Papa is not sick. We're playing a game. Come on, spit the watermelon seeds on Papa's face. Otherwise, we're going to live in the worst house today." Poplar Fruit rubbed his daughter's head and laughed. Only then did Chi-Chi realize that she had made a big mistake and even caused her father to fall into a trap. She blushed and quickly helped her father finish the game. In the last few seconds, Poplar Fruit worked very hard. He ate the watermelon in big mouthfuls and then spat out the watermelon seeds on his face. Poplar Fruit was working hard. Suddenly, a small head came over. It was Kiki. The little girl's mouth was pouting and her cheeks were a little bulging. No way. Wait. Before Poplar Fruit had time to shout, a line of sticky watermelon juice poured down from the bridge of his nose and eyes. Kiki and the watermelon seeds were all on Papa's face. Can this game still be played? Poplar Fruit wanted to cry but couldn't. Chapter 1279. During the final struggle with Kiki, Poplar Fruit thought that the father and daughter were about to lose the game. Hence, the little girl foolishly mixed the melon meat and melon seeds with watermelon juice onto his face. Poplar Fruit closed his eyes as if there was nothing more sorrowful than death, allowing the audience to laugh heartlessly. However, who knew that there would always be someone weaker than the weak? There was always a mountain shorter than the one before it. Poplar Fruit only had a few dozen seconds left and he was ranked second from the bottom. The one ranked last was the extremely clumsy Jun, who had worked hard for half a day. Yay! Poplar Fruit was already very satisfied. As he wiped his face with a towel, he clapped with his daughter. Of course, when Poplar Fruit proudly hugged his daughter and giggled, Jun snappily said, "Poplar Fruit, you are the pot calling the kettle black. We are only 3 seeds apart. My papa is very powerful." Kiki was still explaining to the village chief seriously. She gestured with her fingers. "My papa vomited a lot in front of me but I got rid of it." After saying that, the little girl felt embarrassed. Her performance just now was too clumsy. She smiled shyly and hid in her father's arms. Of course, playing the game was just the order of selection. The room that was chosen depended on one's luck. It was different from the first trip. This time they chose colors that were more abstract and difficult to grasp. 5 colors. Whichever one they chose, they had to go to the corresponding room. Life and death were ruled by fate. Wealth and honor were ruled by the heavens. It did not mean that the first one to choose would have the chance to choose a good room. The first one to choose was Nui. Encountering such a choice again, everyone recalled the first episode. Lu Yi had been too happy too early, which led to the tragedy of courting death. Nuo Yi picked up the blue card and saw the number 1 on the card. It meant room number 1. He happily said to Lu Yi, "We're in first place. Dad, we've won." Everyone roared with laughter. Lu Yi also had a bitter face. He patted his son who was too happy and spoiled his character. He said, "In a while, let's talk about it when we see the house." In second place, Xian chose the pink card. This was what Kiki really wanted. The little girl had whispered it to her father. Poplar Fruit comforted his disappointed daughter with a smile and said, "It's okay. We'll live in whatever house you choose." Next, Dejun took the rose-red card, which was the brightest color. When it was Kiki's turn to choose, there were only 2 cards left, the brick red and the cyan. Actually, girls generally liked red, but the audience guessed that Kiki liked cyan, because the little girl's light yellow dress today was very close to cyan. Poplar Fruit smiled as he watched his daughter bring back the brick red color. His guess was right. Kiki actually liked red and she loved pink the most. As for the clothes, no girl would wear the same color every day just because she liked it, right? They wished they could wear different colors every day. On this point there was a big difference between girls and boys. The remaining cyan was Kong Kong. A few fathers and their children stood up and prepared to look for their own houses. Ahem. The village chief cleared his throat and attracted the attention of the fathers and children. Then he said, "Let me tell everyone. There's a house that everyone must be mentally prepared for." The village chief said forcefully, "It was voted as the best house in the 3 seasons of Where Are You Going, Daddy?" Best? What was best? It It was definitely not the best. No one would be foolish enough to think that the village chief's solemn announcement was just for the cutest and whitest house. The only possibility was that it was the worst. It was unknown if they were frightened by the village chief's words, but the fathers who were laughing just now stopped smiling. Poplar Fruit's smile also froze. He did not know what to say. Poplar Fruit felt a little uneasy. "There's still a house that's worse than the one I stayed in for the first time?" Lu Yi asked. The village chief smiled but did not say anything. The fathers looked at each other one after another. Everyone was nervous in their hearts. Whose head would this lucky pancake fall on? Go. Let's take a look first. Zhou Shimin hugged his youngest son and held his eldest son's hand as they walked out. Actually, the three of them were also worried. After all, Hao was still young. Kiki was a little slow in putting on her shoes. Poplar Fruit waited for his daughter for a while before holding her hand and walking forward leisurely. He was feeling uneasy at first, but after holding his daughter's hand, Poplar Fruit suddenly remembered. Over the years, what kind of suffering had he not experienced? When he was teaching remotely, he was the one who supported the entire project. He went up and down the mountain and slept in the open. How could it be worse than what he had experienced? The production team would not mistreat the guests like this, right? Those who walked quickly in front had already reached the blue house that Nu Yi and his father had chosen. Hearing everyone stop at the door and praise it, Poplar Fruit and Kiki walked over. It really was a blue house. The courtyard and the outside of the house were painted blue. It looked very much like the Mediterranean style. Of course, it was definitely a luxurious house. Lu Yi was still standing at the door. He waved his hand and said, "Let's go in and take a look. Everyone, come visit when you're free." "Mine's here." They arrived at Xian Xian's pink house. As expected, Xian Xian's house was painted pink. It was very beautiful and charming. Unfortunately, 3 men were moving in today. Kiki held her father's hand and stood at the door for a long time. In the end, her father reluctantly dragged her away. "I really like this house." The little girl pouted and said enviously, "It looks like a princess house." "It doesn't matter if it looks like it, but Daddy thinks so." "Actually, it doesn't matter what kind of house it is. As long as our princess Kiki lives in it, then it's a princess house." Poplar Fruit laughed. "Right? N. The little girl obediently nodded her head. However, she still had a little regret. On the way, she could not help but say, if I didn't let Daddy fail, we could also choose Xian Xian's house." "It's okay. We can choose a better one next time." Poplar Fruit smiled. "Kiki, do you know? Daddy actually admires your hard work. Just now Daddy was about to lose. It was you who helped Daddy in the end, although you also spat on Daddy's face." "Hee Daddy," the little girl blushed and smiled shyly. She shook her father's hand and did not let him talk about her scandal. "Although we are only second to last, we still worked hard. Right?" Poplar Fruit struck while the iron was hot and said, "Moreover, since the game is already over and the result has been decided, we shouldn't regret our past mistakes. We will work hard in the future." The little girl understood her father's teachings and nodded her head with a smile. "That's right. Kiki, you can think of this. That's great." Poplar Fruit praised. Chapter 1280. Poplar Fruit and Kiki didn't walk fast because they stayed for a while at Nu Yi in Xian Xian's house before falling behind. He didn't know what kind of expression De Jun and Lin Yongjian had when they passed by his house. If he knew, he definitely wouldn't have laughed when he saw the third house from afar. "Papa, I see it. It's our house." The little girl held her father's hand as if she was leisurely touring a quaint Jiangnan town. Of course, it could also be that the weather was too hot and the little girl was in low spirits after sweating a lot in the morning. "Yes. We're here. Look at the courtyard, it's not bad. We shouldn't be the worst." Poplar Fruit smiled and said in a good mood. The quaint iron gate was wide open. Before they walked in, they could feel the lush greenery in the courtyard. The grapevines were naughtily climbing out of the gate. However, Poplar Fruit neglected one point. The grapevines growing well didn't necessarily mean that the environment was pleasant and comfortable. It could also be the result of no one taking care of it for a long time. Poplar Fruit held his daughter's hand and took a step in. He already saw a scene he didn't want to see. A towering tree separated the front and back. The front was fine, but behind it, there was an endless stretch of broken walls. There was no bustling courtyard, only a few desolate, unfinished buildings. Was this a courtyard? Was this a place where people lived? Why did it feel like it was a wilderness with green mountains and clear water, and a house made of mud? Yes, the place they entered was indeed not bad. There was good shade from the grapevines, and the Kong table below was covered with a neat and comfortable woolen blanket. The table was also filled with Xinjiang delicacies. However, when they looked at the back, it was a cruel reality that was too horrible to look at. Poplar Fruit's face revealed a bitter smile. He sighed in his heart. This time he really fell into a trap. He hadn't seen the actual situation of the house, but Poplar Fruit was sure that the house he and Kiki lived in was definitely the best of the 3 seasons that the village chief said. Where is the house? Kiki looked around curiously, but she couldn't see an open door. Poplar Fruit opened his daughter's umbrella and shook his head. It should be right in front of us. Let's go and take a look. At first, Poplar Fruit thought that it was the 1-story house without a door. Or Kiki's words would be more appropriate to describe it. Papa, are we living in a cave? I think it's a bit like the house where Brother Nui lived last time. The little girl was pulled by her father and carefully walked on the bumpy dirt road towards the cave. At this time, Kiki was still in a good mood. She was not excited, but she did not show any sadness either. Instead, she was a little curious. However, to the disappointment of Poplar Fruit and Kiki, the cave room that looked very bad was not where they were going to live. It was empty and there was nothing inside. Walking out, Lin Yongjian, who had just finished checking their house, came back with Dejun. Poplar Fruit, how is it? I just saw your place and it doesn't look good. Lin Yongjian was not ridiculing. He was a very kind person like Dejun. He asked with concern, do you live here? It was more than not optimistic. Poplar Fruit spread out his hands and said with a smile, no, we are also looking for it. I think it's up there. Chi-Chi had been observing curiously all this time. She pointed at the observation deck, that was 3 stories high, and said, there. That place was even worse. Looked like a few carelessly built house shelves. There was a stone staircase and a wooden staircase that creaked. There was only a handrail on one side. If one was not careful, one might fall down. Kiki and Dejun both wanted to take a look in high spirits, as if they were particularly adventurous. Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly as he followed the little girl who did not take this place seriously. He carefully protected the 2 of them as they walked up. It's really here. Kiki walked up first and looked inside. She happily turned back to her father to take credit. What's there to be happy about? Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly as he followed his daughter in. You live here? Lin Yongjian followed behind and shouted in surprise. How could he not be surprised? 4 sides. There was wind on all sides. The walls stretched as far as the eye could see. Above their heads, there was not even a roof. The sunlight seeped through the scattered and sparse branches. The entire house felt the same scorching heat as the outside world. Poplar Fruit quickly held up an umbrella for his daughter. He gently brushed his daughter's long hair behind her back and said with a smile, Kiki, what do you think? I think it's very beautiful. The little girl did not look depressed at all. She walked to the wall and looked out through the hollow wall. She pointed out to her father and said happily, Dad, look, you can see a forest from here. It was definitely not a forest. The most, it was a vineyard. Poplar Fruit did not expose his daughter. He smiled and rubbed the little girl's head and said, okay, let's go down first. It's too hot here. Poplar Fruit was surprised that his daughter did not show any strong disgust. He was also very pleased. To be honest, Poplar Fruit did not think that such an environment could last for 2 days at all. But since he had chosen it, there was no other way. If Kiki complained about such an environment, Poplar Fruit probably did not know how to persuade his daughter. This won't do. How can there be such a room? Lin Yongjian had already walked down. When Poplar Fruit and Kiki came down, he said, can this child live here? It was probably too much for a boy. Moreover, Poplar Fruit was taking Kiki, the only girl among the 5 children. She likes it very much. Poplar Fruit smiled and leaned on the Kong table with Lin Yongjian. They watched their daughter and Dejun walking around as if they were patrolling their own territory. It's okay. Everyone has lived in a bad place before. It's our turn. We should also experience it. This is the best of the 3 seasons? Lin Yongjian continued and smiled. Yes. Poplar Fruit smiled and nodded. Aya, your daughter is so obedient. She can even tolerate such an environment. Lin Yongjian shook his head and said, Dejun loves cleanliness. Look at the room above, it's full of dirt. He probably can't stand it. Poplar Fruit smiled and changed the topic. We might not be able to sleep there at noon. It's too hot. The sun is above our heads. Kiki and I will sleep on this kong at noon. We'll go up at night. Will it work? It's windy and rainy? Lin Yongjian asked worriedly. It won't leak. Poplar Fruit smiled. No matter how you look at it, it can't be so coincidental that we'll encounter rain in such a hot and rainy place. It's okay. Kiki can still endure hardships. Later in the interview, Poplar Fruit also talked about this issue. Regarding his daughter's reaction, Poplar Fruit was pleasantly surprised. He did not expect that the little girl would not mind such a harsh environment at all. I used to take her to the Miao village in Guishan province. The poor, simple and harsh environment was already very bad, but I didn't expect the house to be even worse this time. It's like living in the wilderness. Poplar Fruit smiled. Maybe it's because she's lived in both good and bad environments. She's not as delicate as everyone thinks. Poplar Fruit's lips curled up slightly. He was proud of his daughter. Chapter 1281. Dajuan and the others went back. Poplar Fruit and his daughter sat comfortably on the kong table. They looked at each other and smiled. You really don't mind? Poplar Fruit asked his daughter with a smile. Kiki shook her head like a rattle drum and said sweetly, Papa, don't you think that our house is also very beautiful? Why do you say that? Poplar Fruit asked curiously, why? Because it's very similar to Londa. Kiki smiled happily from the bottom of her heart. Sister Luo Danny has one, but she is very beautiful. Now I have one too. The Chinese name is Tree House. Poplar Fruit finally understood why his daughter was so happy. It turned out that she thought this house was like a tree house. The little girl had seen it before when she was in France. It was the most beautiful house in Kiki's memory. The ancient and huge banyan tree covered the sky, and an exquisite tree house was built in the trunk of the tree. When night fell, looking at the hanging tree roots in the tree house and the little lights on them, it was as if they were living in a fairy tale world. As long as one was a child, one could not refuse such a romantic and beautiful tree house. Living here, one could walk into sweet and beautiful dreams every day. But this leaky house of ours, other than the ceiling which was randomly built with branches, doesn't look like a tree house at all. He really did not know how the little girl associated it with a tree house, but Poplar Fruit would not interrupt his daughter's imagination. He smiled and said, yes. Dad also thinks it's very beautiful. Moreover, Dad thinks it's even more beautiful than Sister Luo Danny's. Think about it, at night the sun goes down and the moon rises. The stars in the sky are blinking mischievously. You and Dad can comfortably lie on the bed and look at the bright galaxy. These are real stars. Poplar Fruit gestured and described a more romantic world for his daughter. I like it, I like it. The little girl's two big eyes lit up. She happily hugged her father's arm and laughed. It's really beautiful. I already want to sleep. Poplar Fruit and his daughter laughed heartily in this difficult environment. After a while, Dejun came to the door and said, My father invited you and Uncle Poplar Fruit to our house for dinner. Kiki habitually looked at her father, waiting for him to make a decision. Do you want to go? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. It was definitely better to go to Lin Yongjian's house. If she stayed here, she could only eat the non, grapes and dried fruits on the table. However, Poplar Fruit wanted his daughter to have her own opinion. Kiki, our family made a lot of delicious food. Come and join us. Dejun invited her enthusiastically. Kiki looked at Dejun and then at her father. The little girl said, I want to go. Then let's go. Poplar Fruit smiled, took his daughter's hand and followed Dejun, who was leading the way to his house. They first admired Dejun's house. Their house was actually quite ordinary. Compared to Nuo Yi and Xuanxuan's house, it was much worse. However, compared to Poplar Fruit's house, it was simply heaven. After the mistake of inviting Nuo Yi to their house in the first episode, perhaps the program team had also communicated with him. Lin Yongjian understood this mistake, so he did not rashly ask Kiki to stay at their house. Of course, their house was also small. The host was very enthusiastic and the dishes prepared were also very sumptuous. The staple food was beef jerky mixed with noodles, And there were also various Xinjiang specialties such as big plate chicken, hand-caught mutton, and so on. Of course, Kiki did not eat mutton, but other than mutton the little girl also ate very happily. Papa, Papa. Hearing his daughter's call, Poplar Fruit turned his head and saw her slurping a long piece of mixed noodles. Her mouth was still bulging from eating. Oh Papa, oh. The little girl chewed and showed her father with a smile. This noodle is so long I can't even eat it to the end. Poplar Fruit smiled and gently rubbed his daughter's little head. His eyes were full of love. While eating, Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjian chatted with the host. The family had 3 generations and more than a dozen people, but only the grandmother, her son, daughter-in-law, and a 4 or 5-year-old child accompanied the guests. The others were eating in the kitchen. As they chatted, Poplar Fruit realized that the host still knew him very well. It was mainly because of the award ceremony at the beginning of this year and the Kunming riot last year. Poplar Fruit's reputation in Xinjiang had spread far and wide. Those terrorists are traitors who divided the country. Grandma said angrily. They are no longer people of Xinjiang. They only know how to defame us Uyghurs. Grandma was so agitated that she even said a few words in Uyghur. Her son was quite taciturn, but he dutifully translated for his mother. Grandma, don't worry, I understand. Poplar Fruit quickly patted his grandmother's back and comforted her with a smile. Grandma, don't worry. Kiki also sensibly held her grandmother's hand with her father. Although she didn't understand what the adults were talking about. I'm not worried. Grandma calmed down and said, Good children, you are all good children. Grandma is worried that you will have a bad opinion of Xinjiang and us Uyghurs because of those scum. In recent years, Uyghurs have been demonized in the mainland. On the one hand, there were indeed some greedy people who sold cakes at sky-high prices, which destroyed everyone's impression of them. On the other hand, there was the Kunming case that shocked the world. Therefore, Uyghurs working in the mainland often received strange looks from many people. Grandma, don't worry. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, We all understand. Last year something like this happened in Kunming. Poplar Fruit talked about what he had seen at that time. This story was not his, but Song Jiwen had witnessed it with his own eyes. My friend went to donate blood. There was a long line at the blood donation place. There were many injured people and the hospital's blood bank was in an emergency. Many citizens volunteered to donate blood for the patients. Song Jiwen also went. However, a Uyghur young man who was dressed very obviously suddenly appeared in the line. At first, everyone was a little afraid and avoided him. They looked at him with surprise and fear. The Uyghur young man lined up calmly and patiently donated blood. Then he faced the crowd that was watching him and bowed deeply. His voice was not loud, but it was very powerful as he said, Those people who killed people with knives are all animals. They don't deserve to be Xinjiang people, they don't deserve to be Uyghurs. Poplar Fruit sighed and said, So we really can't look at people with prejudice. Most of the Uyghurs are still very kind. Whether it's the Han people or the Uyghurs, they are all Chinese. As long as we unite, we won't be afraid of these separatists who are influenced by foreign countries. Yes. Grandma and Lin Yongjian both clapped their hands. Chapter 1282. Putting aside those slightly heavy matters, Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjian chatted happily with their grandmother's family. From them, Poplar Fruit learned some stories about the grapevine ditch. First of all, the grapevine ditch was not a nameless place. In China, as long as one traveled to Xinjiang, it was impossible for anyone who did enough homework not to know about the grapevine ditch. It was one of the best and was ranked as a national 5A scenic spot, the top, along with the Forbidden City, Li River and other famous scenic spots. Of course, in addition to these, there were many local myths and legends. Grandma was an expert at telling stories and Kiki and Dajun were fascinated by them. During the lunch break, Poplar Fruit took his daughter home. The house with the sun on the high ground could not be lived in for the time being. Poplar Fruit was going to let his daughter take a nap on the Kong table under the shade of the tree. Fortunately, except for the room, there was still a necessary bathroom. Poplar Fruit changed his daughter's sweat-soaked dress, wiped her sweat and put on a comfortable nightgown. It was a coincidence that the little girl's rose-red nightgown was quite similar to the local style in texture. The nightgown was not long and it only hung above the knees. The 2 white and slender legs were like 2 green onions, charming and beautiful. Papa, I'll wipe it for you too. The little girl obediently beckoned her father to squat down, and then she held a wrung towel and wiped her father's face. "Do you feel very comfortable?" Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter and smiled. "Very comfortable and very happy." Unfortunately, this scene was not captured by the camera because it was in the bathroom. But sometimes, it was enough to know the happiness, wasn't it? Poplar Fruit did not want his daughter's little feet to be stained with the dust on the ground, so he simply stretched out his big hands and carried the little girl up. Compared to Poplar Fruit's big body, Kiki was a little girl at this time, and she was easily held by Poplar Fruit's arms. The little girl screamed for a while and then she laughed because she thought it was funny. Poplar Fruit carried his daughter with one hand and walked to the Kong table. He smiled and made up a song. He sang loudly, "I came from the mountains and caught a sheep. Take her to the mountains and marry her as a bride. So unpleasant, so unpleasant." The little girl was thrown onto the Kong bed by her father. She rolled around on the comfortable woolen blanket, then covered her ears and giggled. "If it's bad, why don't you sing it?" Poplar Fruit also sat on the Kong table and reached out to tickle the little girl, causing her to roll around and laugh non-stop. "Alright, stop messing around. Let's take a nap." Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter with eyes full of love. He helped his daughter pull up her nightgown and said gently, "No." Kiki pulled her father's arm and got up. She was still in a state of excitement. The little girl looked at the photographer next to her who was conscientiously making himself invisible, and then excitedly said to her father, "I want to dance for Papa." "Dance? What dance?" Poplar Fruit was a little surprised and asked with a smile. "Uncle Hu and I have been learning to dance at Master Bai's." Kiki pressed her father's shoulder and stood on the Kong bed. She suddenly leaned over to her father's ear and whispered to him with some embarrassment, "I think I dance very well." "So you want to dance for Papa to see, right?" Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. The little girl felt that it was not good to praise herself, but her shy look was very cute. Kiki nodded. "Then dance for Papa to see," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Papa likes to see Kiki dance very much. So Kiki danced for her father once. There was no accompaniment, but the little girl had a good sense of rhythm. She danced like a rose dancing on a drum. This analogy was not exaggerated at all. Look at the little girl's flame-like red nightgown, her graceful and dexterous little hands turning, her soft and boneless waist swaying, and her slender jade-like delicate feet moving slowly. This was just an ordinary Uyghur dance, but under the little girl's performance, it was not inferior to the most beautiful popular dance in the world. Moreover, there was an additional celestial aura in the gentle beauty. "Great. Trace_bien. French, too great." Yanghua laughed and opened her arms to let her daughter, who was bashful after the dance, in. An intoxicating blush appeared on Chi-Chi's pinkish little face, and it looked especially lovely and moving against the backdrop of her rose-like nightgown. There was a saying that people were prettier than flowers, and people were more beautiful than flowers. Presumably, the audience watching the TV at this moment was also very fond of this scene. After all, Kiki was tired. After the dance, she obediently lay down to sleep. Poplar Fruit held a small flower umbrella to block the little girl's light spots that leaked through the grapevines, and gently fanned his daughter with the other hand. "Do you know what Master Bai means?" Bai in the Uyghur language meant a rich man. Master Bai was a rich man. The reason why Master Bai is famous is because of the legend of Effendi in Xinjiang. Effendi is as smart as a sheep, and Master Bai is like big wolf who likes to go against Effendi. Under her father's gentle voice, Chi-Chi gradually sank into dreamland. When she woke up in the afternoon, she was a little girl full of vitality again. Poplar Fruit changed his daughter into a red and white striped dress. The dress was waist-tight, which suited Kiki's slim figure very well. The hem only reached her knees, and the delicate crochet pattern was like lace, adding a touch of moving beauty to the regular stripes. The dress was of course one of the clothes that Jing Yujia bought for Kiki. Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei were not as fashionable as her when it came to dressing up. Before the little girl could appreciate it herself, the photographer handed over a mission card. "You read it." Poplar Fruit handed the mission card to his daughter with a smile. Kiki took it graciously and sat down in her father's arms. She pointed at the mission card and read it word by word. "Please dress yourself up with grapes to participate in the grape festival in the afternoon." "There's a grape festival in the afternoon." Kiki turned around happily and asked, Papa, will there be a lot of grapes to eat? Don't be happy so early. We still have to dress up first. Poplar Fruit smiled and rubbed his daughter's little head. He turned to look at the photographer and asked helplessly, Brother, how should we dress up? Kiki did not think too much. She only thought about eating, but Poplar Fruit was depressed. Dress up with grapes? Can grapes be dressed up? Grapes are not cosmetics. The photographer placed 2 baskets in front of Poplar Fruit. One was Uyghur silk cloth and the other was a basket of grapes. Hey, don't eat them. Poplar Fruit smiled and stopped his daughter's claws from reaching out to the grapes. He said, These are the jewels and jades that you and your father will use to dress up this afternoon. Chapter 1283. The little girl was full of curiosity towards all new things. She clapped her hands happily and giggled. Oh, okay. Papa, can I dress up super beautifully? Papa, take a look. Poplar Fruit deliberately used his finger to measure his daughter's face, then nodded and said mysteriously like a Taoist who specialized in cheating money, Not bad, you can dress up as the Grape Princess. Yes, I want to dress up as the Grape Princess, the little girl said with a smile. Teacher Yang, children don't need to participate in dressing up. The director poured cold water on them and said, The children have their own tasks. While Kiki was happy for nothing. Kiki left with the director's sister to meet up with the other children, leaving Poplar Fruit alone in the courtyard. He had to think about how to dress up with grapes. Speaking of grapes, Poplar Fruit suddenly thought of Stephen Chow's boast about Journey to the West and Patriarch Bodhi. Although grapes and Bodhi had nothing to do with each other, the pronunciation was somewhat similar. When Poplar Fruit thought of Patriarch Bodhi, he suddenly had an idea. He could dress up like Patriarch Bodhi. Of course, it couldn't be exactly the same. After all, if he only used grapes, Poplar Fruit couldn't make flowers appear. First, he split the big bunch of grapes into small bunches and small bunches. Then he used a rubber band to string them together one by one. In this way, it formed a grape ring that looked like the garland worn by Patriarch Bodhi in the movie. Poplar Fruit put it on his head and smiled at the cameraman and made a V sign with his hand. He was a living male version of Athena. Who would have thought that the usually serious and old-fashioned Poplar Fruit could act cute like this? Poplar Fruit was addicted to using the rubber band. He made himself a grape necklace, and that wasn't enough. He also made grape bracelets and wore a few rings around his arm. Of course, apart from these, Poplar Fruit also used silk to make himself Patriarch Bodhi's kasaya. Not to mention other things, but the heavy grape ornaments on his body showed that he was definitely a rich man. The locals called him Master Bai. Let's not talk about Yonggua's side for now. Chi-Chi's side also seemed to want to compete with grape. The village chief gathered the children and gave them their mission. Pick grapes. Of course, they had to be grouped into groups first. Kong Kong and Nuo would use rock paper scissors to pick their teammates. Nuo picked Kiki, while Kong Kong's team picked Dejun, Xian and Mini Xian. It couldn't be helped. Xian and Mini Xian were sold together. Brother Ni, you chose me? The little girl couldn't believe it at first. Yes, I like you. We're finally together. Nuo Yi's choice of Chi-Chi was not surprising at all. The two children had already become very good friends during their second journey. The two children hugged each other passionately, then held hands and jumped happily together. They were in high spirits. Compared to the depressed atmosphere of the other team, one was happy and the other was sad. Especially Xian. Little chubby Xian with curly hair kept looking at Nuo Yi, hoping that he would choose him to join Sister Kiki's team. That way he could be with Sister Kiki. Unfortunately, it was unknown whether it was fate playing a joke on him, or little chubby Xian was punished for falling in love with his beautiful sister during lunch, but Xian was chosen by Kong Kong. But this way there was a huge difference in the number of people in the two teams. One team had 4 people while the other only had 2. Why don't Hao come to our team? The little girl was very kind and suggested. No. Hao shook his head. He held his brother's hand and refused to let go. After all, he was still too young. He was only 2 years old and couldn't move independently like Nina. But Kiki's suggestion made Xian's mind active. He said in a childish voice, My brother doesn't want to go. Why don't I go instead? The audience couldn't help but burst into laughter at this thought. Xian was indeed a mischievous child. He liked his sister so much that he wanted to abandon his brother. It was unknown if Hao Hao, who was relying on his brother at this moment, understood. If he understood, he would really ask for the size of his psychological trauma. Of course, Xian Xian's suggestion was not feasible. The two teams began to move according to their original plan. They were going to pick grapes. Not only did they have to pick a lot, they had to pick delicious grapes. The vineyard that Nuo Yi and Kiki went to was different from Kong Kong's, so the two happy children went to their own vineyard first. The verdant vineyard was different from the one at home. The vines here were denser and not as tall. They could reach out and touch them. It was the harvest season. Looking around, there were heavy green grapes hanging down everywhere. They were big and full. One look and you could tell that they were of high quality. If they could eat grapes at home, they could be sold in the market. However, the children had never seen so many grapes. As soon as he came in, the two children screamed and jumped up in joy. "I love it here." Kiki held her hands. The little girl closed her eyes as if she was intoxicated. She said, "If I want to eat grapes, I can reach out and eat them." "I love it here too." Nuo Yi nodded in agreement. He rubbed his hands together and prepared to break the grapes. "You have to taste it first to see if it's sweet or not." Kiki remembered the village chief's request and reminded him. She reached out and plucked a grape from the vines. Just as she was about to put it into her mouth, she suddenly remembered something. She blinked and turned to look at the choreographer sister behind the photographer. She asked, "Sister, can I eat it directly? Dad said that the food outside could only be eaten if it was washed clean." In the past, Kiki often helped her dad wash fruits at home. "You can eat it directly. The vineyards here don't use pesticides. It's very clean." The choreographer sister smiled. The little girl ate the grape. Immediately, her big eyes squinted in joy. She smiled like a crescent moon. "Is it sweet?" Nuo Yi asked curiously. "I think it's super sweet," Kiki said, still unsatisfied. She plucked 2 more grapes from the previous grape. She passed one to Nuo Yi and ate the other one herself. So sweet, so delicious." Nuo Yi moved his hands around excitedly and turned on the vibration mode. Little boys were also crazy. When they were with good friends, they would lose all restraint. However, his behavior made Kiki giggle. She held Nuo Yi's hand and copied his shaking. Then she giggled and said, "I think you're like a washing machine." Yes, when a washing machine was working, it would shake like crazy too. Chapter 1284. Kiki wasn't the only one who was happy to pick grapes with her friends. He was happy too. To him, Chi-Chi was the same as Dejun. They were both good friends. However, as a girl, a bright and cute girl, a pretty and smart girl, Kiki had a unique attraction to the little boy. It wasn't hard to explain why Nuo Yi was so excited when he was able to do a mission with Kiki alone. In front of the girl he liked, not to the extent of adoration, the little boy tried his best to show off. For example, he tried his best to pick the biggest bunch of grapes. AI. However, he overestimated his strength. No matter how hard he tugged, he couldn't pick the bunch of grapes. "I think this is delicious, I think this is delicious too." Kiki, the little glutton, used the excuse of wanting to taste the grapes to run around the vineyard. Her mouth was full of grapes, and her hands were holding a few more grapes, preparing to stuff them into the vineyard. Looking at her smiling eyes, it was obvious that the little girl was eating happily. However, when Chi-Chi heard Nuo Yi's laborious cries, she turned around and skipped over. She giggled as she placed her 2 little hands on Nuo Yi's shoulders and said, "Big brother Nuo Yi, let me help you." This afternoon, Nuo Yi was wearing a red top, the same color as Chi-Chi's dress. Of course, the clothes worn by the little girl were nicer. She was like her father, tall and well-proportioned. She was like a clothes hanger. No matter what she wore, she would be able to bring out the taste of fashion. Speaking of height, Kiki was half a head taller than Nuo Yi. She was the second tallest among the 5 children, second only to Kong Kong. She gently lifted her hand and reached the roots of the bunch of grapes. The little girl was very strong. With a gentle tug, she helped her friend pluck the bunch of grapes. "Brother Nuo Yi, this is for you." Kiki plucked it and placed it in Nuo Yi's arms. Then she told Nuo Yi about her discovery. "Let's pluck this, okay? I ate it just now. It's super sweet, sweeter than the rest." "Kiki, but I can't help you," Nuo Yi said with difficulty. He needed 2 hands to hold the big bunch of grapes. It wasn't because they were heavy but because they were too big. It was very difficult to handle them with one hand. It's okay, I can do it alone. Kiki didn't care at all. This bunch was a little high, so she gently tiptoed to pick it off. Then Chi-Chi used her other hand to pluck a bunch of them. However, after picking 2 skewers, Kiki's hands were full. She looked at her friend and spread out her hands. She said regretfully, "Well, now I don't have hands to pick grapes. If only I had brought my umbrella with me. That way you can put the grapes in the umbrella and hold a lot of them." But Kiki still wanted to pick them because there was still a long time and she had just found a lot of sweet grapes. Nuo-i put the grapes on a clean table and started to take off his shirt. However, maybe it was because of the microphone cord, Nuo-i couldn't take it off after a while. Instead, he was tangled up with himself. "Let me help you." Kiki put the grapes aside and helped Nuo-i take off his shirt. "Put it with me." It turned out that Nuo-i had decided to make a cloth bag out of his clothes so that he could carry more grapes. The little boy focused on the 3 bunches of grapes on the stage and put them into his clothes. Then he said, "If we pick more, we'll win." "Brother Nu, you're so awesome." Kiki just realized that her friend was so imaginative. The little girl said with admiration. "Then I'll continue plucking grapes. There's a lot of delicious food." Kiki happily turned her head and continued to work hard. From afar in the fragrant vineyard, there was a little girl in a red and white dress working hard. Nuo-i felt that it was enough, so he wrapped it up and stood up with the shirt. However, it was just a small shirt and couldn't hold so many grapes. Once he stood up, a bunch of grapes fell to the ground. The little boy said in annoyance, "Kiki, no, they all fell." At this time, Kiki came back with 2 bunches of grapes. She and Noi looked at each other and didn't know what to do. "It's okay, I'll help you pick them up." The little girl was still very energetic. She worked hard to pick up the grapes on the ground and put them on the table with her newly plucked grapes. Now she had to solve the problem of where to put the grapes. The little girl remembered that when she woke up in the afternoon, the photographer handed over the props. Those grapes were all in a bamboo basket. The little girl had a flash of inspiration and said to Nu-i, "Brother Nu-i, I have a good idea. My papa and I live nearby. I'll ask my papa for a basket first, then I'll come back and pick grapes with you." Kiki said happily. "The basket can hold a lot of grapes." "Okay then." Nuo-i nodded. However, before Kiki ran out of the vineyard, the little boy was unwilling to stand there alone. He shouted, "Kiki, wait for me. I want to go too." Nu-i held the grapes wrapped in clothes and forgot to put them down. He hurried to catch up with Kiki. The 2 children held hands and went to find the basket. In fact, Kiki didn't return to her own home because brother Lin Yongjian's home was closer. At the gate of the courtyard, Kiki saw Uncle Lin Yongjian's strange outfit and was attracted to go in. "Please call me Uncle my matey." Uncle my matey, who had become very funny after the disguise, asked for the basket. The 2 children laughed and chased each other back to the orchard. Kiki's slender legs were unusually fast when she ran. In a flash, Nui shouted, "Aya, wait for me, Kiki." The little foodie really wanted to eat grapes, but she also wanted to win. So Kiki put in a lot of effort. One moment she was picking grapes, the next moment she heard Nuo-yi's call to help. In a short while the basket was filled with grapes. She was very efficient. However, something happened to Nuo-yi again. He actually wanted to put on his shirt, but his clothes were all tangled up, and he couldn't open them no matter how hard he tried. When he saw Chi-Chi coming over, he called out weakly, "Help me." Kiki was of course willing to help, but she misunderstood and thought that Nuo-yi wanted her to help pick grapes. In the end she agreed but left Nuo-yi hanging there. The little boy was a little anxious and his temper slowly rose. Chapter 1285. However, it was obvious that Chi-Chi hadn't noticed it yet because she happily plucked another big bunch of grapes. When Nuo-yi called out for the second time, Kiki finally reacted. She said in a clear voice, "Okay, I'll help you." The little girl was very willing to help others. On one hand, it was because she was kind. On the other hand, it felt good to have others rely on her. In terms of intelligence, Kiki was obviously much better than Nuo-yi. The little girl quickly found the beginning and end of the clothes and helped Nuo-yi turn them over. She handed them over to Nuo-yi and waved her hand while giggling, "Then you can wear them." However, Kiki's bright and cheerful laughter did not dispel Nuo-yi's anger. He held his clothes and looked left and right, trying to distinguish the front from the back. At this moment the little girl looked and giggled. She felt that it was very funny and pointed at the clothes and said, Brother Nui, look, this doesn't even have hands. The sleeves of the clothes had not been pulled out yet. It was unknown whether it was because Nuoi felt that Chi-Chi's words were mocking him, or because his accumulated impatience had reached a critical point, but he suddenly pulled back and completely snatched his clothes from Chi-Chi's hands. The little girl had kindly wanted to help him pull out his sleeves just now. Okay, I'll wear them myself. Nuoi turned his head and fiddled with the clothes. Kiki was shocked by Nuoyi's actions. The little girl scratched her head in confusion. If it was any other time, Kiki would have been angry just like the last time in the earthen building. However, Kiki was in a good mood today. In this bright summer, in this beautiful vineyard, and with Nuoi who was already very very good friends, Kiki did not mind. Okay then. She turned her head and decided to find something else to do. Then I'll help you get the grapes, okay? Kiki maintained her cheerful smile and said crisply. The little girl began to gather the grapes into the basket, including the grapes that were placed on the table. No. Because Kiki didn't seem to understand his anger just now, Nuoyi's anger hadn't dissipated and he suddenly shouted. At this moment Kiki was really shocked by Nui. She stood up and looked at her good friend. She scratched her head, not understanding what she had done wrong. She originally thought that Nuoi was just being anxious, but now that Nuoyi's behavior was getting worse, the director had no choice but to speak up to restrain him. Nui, you can't do this. Although the program was to allow the children to express themselves freely as much as possible and let them show their natural instincts, being too casual was not necessarily a good thing for the program. It was necessary to mediate so that the children could maintain a harmonious relationship and not quarrel over a small matter. There were still many episodes to come. Kiki came to Nui's side. She was confused as to why Nui was angry. Wasn't everything fine just now? Of course, not to mention Kiki, even the adults were a little confused. It could only be said that a child's temper was like the weather in May. One moment it was sunny, the next it was raining heavily. It was unpredictable. The weather was already hot and she had painstakingly picked so many grapes. The little girl's face was dripping with sweat and her hair was wet and stuck to her face. It was like the white crystal hair in the movie Journey to the West. She looked at her little friend in confusion and kept wiping her sweat. Nuoyi's mood suddenly fell. Kiki's actions looked like she was wiping her tears. He thought that his bad temper had wronged his good friend. The little boy was suddenly at a loss as well. What's wrong with you? Kiki blinked her big eyes and asked in confusion. I'm sorry. Nuoi suddenly lowered his arms and walked to a far corner with his head buried. He choked as he said, I want to go somewhere and cry. No one had expected Nui to suddenly act like this. But fortunately this also showed that the little boy was not deliberately throwing a tantrum. He still sincerely wanted to admit his mistake. Kiki followed. The little girl saw her good friend crying and felt anxious and worried. She bent down and carefully checked on her good friend. All she heard was Nuoyi sobbing. At first the little girl was at a loss. She turned around and looked at the choreographer sister. She wanted the choreographer sister's help. But the choreographer sister and the cameraman decided not to follow. They filmed the two children from afar to see how they would deal with this conflict. Nuoi was crying sadly, but it felt like the thunder was bigger than the rain. Kiki often acted like a spoiled child to gain her father's love, so she quickly sensed it. The little girl asked in confusion, Are you pretending to cry? She did not mean to blame him. The little girl felt that it was funny and giggled. No, sob. Nui was so anxious that he really cried. But no one could tell as he covered his face. I don't want you to be angry. I'm not angry. Kiki waved her hand and smiled. You were angry just now. The little girl's logic was very clear. But at this time she really wanted her good friend to not cry so sadly. Because the kind Kiki felt that if he cried she would also feel very sad. I'm not Nui anymore. Chi-Chi's words made Nui feel even more guilty. He broke down and started to cry. His voice was filled with guilt and it made people who heard it panic. Of course, this sentence sounded a little funny to the audience. However, Kiki cared more about her good friend's feelings. She squatted down and gently patted Nui's back like how her father usually comforted her. Brother Nui, don't be sad, okay? I'm not angry. Kiki's voice was soft and pleasant. We are good friends, so we will forgive each other. So don't cry, okay? Are we still good friends? Nuoi was still covering his face. He peeked at Kiki, who was smiling like a flower, and asked pitifully. At this time he was still a little nervous. The reason why he regretted so much and cried so guiltily was because he was worried that he would lose his favorite friend because of this quarrel. Of course. Kiki smiled sweetly. The little girl stretched out her white and tender little hand. Nuo-i was stunned for a moment before he handed over one of his hands. Kiki used her strength and gently pulled Nuo-i, who was gradually calming down, up. She gave him a reassuring hug, then smiled mischievously and skipped away. He's not angry anymore. Kiki ran in front of the director to ask for credit. She returned to her excited and lively state when she was picking grapes. She giggled, danced, and made playful faces. On the other side, Nuo-i, who was gradually calming down, looked at his cute little sister with a smile on his face. Chapter 1286. Poplar Fruit, who had finished dressing up, was finally ready to go. After tidying up, he confidently walked out of the courtyard. It was impossible to be confident. Poplar Fruit had just taken a step when he shrunk back. He nervously turned to ask the cameraman. The two were already familiar with each other after a few episodes. What do you think? It won't be too shocking, right? What do you think? In ancient times there were jewelry maniacs who wore gold and silver. Now there was Poplar Fruit, the grape maniac who used grapes to make more than 10 accessories for himself. His head, ears, neck, arms, wrists, waist, and even his thighs were covered in grape jewelry. That's right. It's not too heavy. The cameraman secretly complained in his heart. His next sentence was a fake response. Teacher Yang, you're so cool. One look and I can tell that you're flattering me. Poplar Fruit laughed. He walked toward the gathering place with satisfaction. This outfit was really cumbersome. Poplar Fruit did not mind the weight, but he did not dare walk too fast. He was afraid that if his steps were too big, the grapes would fall. After all, these grapes were only strung together with rubber bands. Because he did not walk fast, Poplar Fruit was quickly caught up by his daughter and Nuo-i. From afar, Poplar Fruit heard his daughter call, "Papa." The little girl's voice was clear and clean. It was very easy to distinguish. Moreover, it was mixed with joy. Hearing it, one's heart was infected. You two went to pick grapes? Poplar Fruit smiled and waited for them. Perhaps the little girl was very hardworking and picked a lot of grapes. If she carried the basket with Nuo-i, she might lose her balance. After all, Nuo-i's strength was far from Kiki's. Therefore, Nuo-i used a straw tray to carry a few bunches of grapes while the little girl carried the heavy basket and walked in front. As expected of his daughter, Poplar Fruit praised in his heart. Not only did the little girl not complain about being tired, she was smiling and in high spirits as she told her friends funny stories. Of course, when she arrived in front of her father, the little girl's attention was completely attracted by her father's strange clothes. Papa, how did you become like this? Kiki didn't answer her father's question and couldn't help giggling. Do you think Daddy looks handsome like this? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. He even deliberately posed as if he was going to walk on the runway. I think Papa is super handsome and fun. The little girl would always support her father. She put down the basket, waved her hand and said, "We also saw Brother Dajuan's Papa just now. Brother Dajuan's Papa is dressed as Uncle Maimati." Yes, Uncle Maimati. Only then did Nanoi recover from the shock of seeing Poplar Fruit's uncle. He stuck out his belly and said, "Then Kiki, I think your father looks a lot like Master Bai." No, Master Bai doesn't look like this. Kiki laughed and had to hold Nanoi's shoulder. She said, "Master Bai has a beard like Dajuan's Papa." What kind of grapes did you pick? Why did you pick so many? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. He also felt that he was quite strange. Although his daughter liked it very much, he didn't want to continue this topic. Papa, squat down. Kiki just remembered. She waved her hand and happily picked a few grapes from the basket. She stuffed them into her father's mouth and asked expectantly, "Is it delicious? We're all super sweet grapes." Yes, we were at that place. There were a lot of grapes. Nanoi also excitedly told his story. So sweet, very sweet. Poplar Fruit smiled and touched his daughter's head. He said, Let's go. Let's go to the rendezvous point. The village chief has been waiting for us for a long time." Poplar Fruit didn't want to help. He just walked with his daughter. The little girl carried the basket with all her strength. She didn't complain about the weight and didn't feel tired. Even with her father by her side, she was very strong. Poplar Fruit could see Kiki's progress. On the way they met Zhou Shimin, who was dressed even more shockingly. He had a scarf tied around his head and the scarf was decorated with grapes. What was even more eye-catching was that he was actually standing on a scooter and letting the staff carry him all the way to the rendezvous point at lightning speed. Wow! Kiki and Nanoi cheered. I just saw a grape man. Nanoi said in a daze. That's Xuanxuan's papa. The little girl giggled. I also want a scooter. Poplar Fruit sighed. Haha. Looking at Zhou Shimin's smug smile, it really made people jealous. When they were about to reach the rendezvous point, Poplar Fruit and the others met Kong Kong again. Kong Kong's group had too many 2 to 3-year-old children. Boss Kong couldn't take care of them all. He helplessly fell to the back. His hands and arms were almost full of grapes. After Hao Hao, who he helped just now, threw the grapes to him, he also ran away like he was flying. The cold little boy didn't complain about this. He helplessly looked at Hao Hao's back as he left. He silently picked up the grapes and worked hard to transport them to the rendezvous point. They didn't consider using a basket, so now Kong Kong had a hard time transporting the grapes. Brother Kong Kong. His friends chased from behind. He turned around and saw Kiki and Nani. You guys picked so many? Kong Kong calmly asked. Brother Kong Kong, we're here to help you. The little girl sweetly smiled. Just now, Poplar Fruit reminded her that Kong Kong seemed to be working hard. Yes, she can help you. Nanoi honestly supported his heavy tray and said, mine is so heavy. Not to mention that Nanoi was pretentious, he also had a lot of grapes in his arms. Who told them to pick so many grapes in a moment of joy? No need, you guys are already very heavy. Kong Kong glanced at Kiki's basket that was several times heavier. He shook his head and said expressionlessly. His face was tense. When he turned around and saw his sister running happily over, he was also pleasantly surprised. But now she was shy. Poplar Fruit stood behind with a smile. He didn't say anything and waited to see how his daughter would handle it. You can do that. Kiki didn't disappoint her father and found a solution. She put down the basket and helped Brother Kong Kong take the grapes that were about to fall out of his hands. She put them into her own basket and said, Brother Kong Kong, put them in too. Then we'll carry the basket together, okay? Kiki, you have to remember that Brother Kong Kong's are a few bunches. Later you have to return them to Brother Kong Kong. Poplar Fruit reminded her with a smile. I remember. The little girl happily squatted by the basket and said, Papa, look, Brother Kong Kong's are this. Thank you. Kong Kong was helped, but he could also breathe a sigh of relief. He didn't have to continue to be on tenterhooks about the grapes falling. Kiki and Kong Kong lifted the basket together. Kiki was very strong. Because of Kong Kong's age, the little boy's strength wasn't bad either. They complemented each other perfectly. No need to thank me. We're good friends, so we have to help each other. Kiki said with a bright smile. That pure and beautiful flower of friendship had bloomed in this beautiful midsummer. Chapter 1287. Nuo-yi and Xian-Xian's fondness for Kiki was very obvious. However, Nuo-yi was different from Xian-Xian. He treated Kiki as a good friend and was not as possessive as Xian-Xian. Hence, when Kiki helped Brother Kong Kong, Lui was vexed. I'm carrying too much weight. I can't help you. When they arrived at the gathering point, the fathers were all dressed up in all sorts of weird ways. Poplar Fruit thought that he was cool enough, but when he saw Zhou Shimin, Lu Yi and the rest, he smiled and cupped his hands, admitting defeat. Zhou Shimin did not care about his image. Poplar Fruit did not notice earlier, but now he realized that he had stuffed 2 bunches of grapes in front of his chest. He looked like a female version of Michael Jackson. Daddy has Mimi. When Xian-Xian saw his father's appearance, he dodged and rushed towards his father, scaring Zhou Shimin so much that he ran away. Don't pinch anymore. If you pinch anymore, it will explode. On the other side, after Kiki helped Brother Kong Kong distribute his grapes, she skipped over to her father's side. Daddy, want to wear it too. I think it's so pretty. She was referring to the grape wreath on Poplar Fruit's head. The little girl had expressed her interest on the way there. Poplar Fruit smiled brightly. He took off the grape wreath and gently placed it on his daughter's head. He smiled and said, After you put it on, don't jump around. Otherwise it will fall off. Of course, Kiki was also very careful. She did not dare to raise her head and only tensed her neck nervously. Then she pulled her father's hand and asked, "Daddy, look. Have I become more beautiful?" "Of course you are the most beautiful." Poplar Fruit used his index finger to scratch his daughter's nose and smiled. The grape picking competition was about to begin. The village chief wanted to judge which team picked the sweetest grapes. In order to prove themselves, the children all went forward and picked their grapes to feed the village chief. What made people not know whether to laugh or cry was still Chi-Chi and Xian. Chi-Chi wanted to eat it herself, so she stuffed it into the village chief's mouth while she ate it herself. Xian, on the other hand, grabbed a handful full of food and kept feeding it to the village chief. The village chief's mouth was stuffed full and he couldn't stop eating. Although there were 4 people in Kong Kong's team, they didn't manage to pick many grapes. The main reason was that they lacked tools like baskets. Each person could only carry a few grapes, so the capacity of their hands was limited. In the end, Chi-Chi's team won. Kong Kong's score was 338 kilograms while Kiki's score was almost 7 kilograms. Of course, the prize lollipops were shared among the 6 children. Alright, next we're going to the location of the grape festival. Under the village chief's command, the children and their fathers all walked out of the door. "Wow, what is this?" Kiki excitedly held her father's hand and asked. There were many motorcycles parked in front of the door. Not to mention the photographers, there were 5 very fashionable scooters that surprised the children. Weren't those Zhou Shimen scooters? It turned out that these scooters were the father's transport to the grape festival. "Give the garland to Daddy." Poplar Fruit smiled as he put on a safety helmet for his daughter. "Are we going to take this scooter?" Kiki looked at her father happily and asked. "Yes. Come stand on it." Poplar Fruit sat on the scooter first. The seat of the scooter wasn't big, so it could only fit 1 adult. However, the children's butts weren't big, so they could sit in front of their fathers. They could also stand, but standing wasn't very safe. "Hold on tight here. When Daddy drives later you can't let go, okay?" Poplar Fruit smiled as he let his daughter hold on to the headlights. He said gently, "Because if you hold on tight, Daddy can protect you better." "Daddy, I want to ride it too." The little girl looked left and right excitedly. She couldn't wait to become a female rider who drove a beautiful scooter. "Not now, you have to wait until you grow up." Poplar Fruit laughed and said. Touching the scooter, Poplar Fruit suddenly recalled some memories. It was more than 10 years ago when he was still in junior high school. However, because he had to go to the county to study, every Sunday night his father would drive him to the county to study. Although it was a woman's scooter, although the color of the scooter was extremely red, and although people would look at him strangely when he went to the county, that was Poplar Fruit's best memory. The cool wind blew and dust flew, but his father's broad chest was his warmest support. Just like now, when Kiki sat on the scooter, she was nervously leaning on his chest. Of course, that Mulan had long been sold to some junkyard. After his life was better, his sister also changed his father's scooter, but that memory was forever engraved in Poplar Fruit's mind. Kiki had sat on a scooter before, but it was very rare. But this time his father's experience awakened Poplar Fruit's memory. He didn't know if it could also leave a strong mark in Kiki's childhood. Well, it seemed that there was hope. The little girl sat on the scooter, happily shouting non-stop. She was not nervous at all, instead she was very excited. Chi-Chi liked the feeling of shuttling back and forth between the natural world, so she liked to take trains and planes. Although this electric scooter wasn't as fast, it didn't confine people to a small space. She could feel the charm of nature intimately. "Daddy, I like it here." Kiki turned her head and said happily. Of course, the little girl was wearing a helmet, so she couldn't turn around no matter how hard she tried. "Daddy also thinks it's fun." Poplar Fruit laughed. He seemed to have found his long-lost childhood. "Daddy, let's buy a scooter like this at home, okay?" Kiki asked. "No problem." The father and daughter's voices drifted along the winding path between the green trees, as if the drones flying in the air could hear them. When they arrived at the ancient city where the grape festival was held, it was like coming to Disneyland in Xizang. Although there weren't all kinds of fun animated characters to welcome them, the antique castle was still a feast for the children's eyes. They walked through the garden, walked up the stairs, and stepped on the wide platform of the castle. From afar they could hear beautiful music. After they came up, they saw a huge group of singing and dancing people welcoming them. Enthusiastic Uyghur girls carried baskets of sweet melons and fruits, while countless beauties in splendid attire danced gracefully in the large square and on the higher floors of the castle. Other than beauties, there were also handsome men. Groups of Uyghur youths also danced to the rhythm of the music and danced in unison. It was so wonderful that it was too much for the eyes to take in. They really didn't even have time to eat. Chapter 1288. The Uyghur girls and young men all looked very good when they danced, especially when the Uyghur girls twisted their waists to end the dance. Poplar Fruit noticed that his daughter could not help but bend her waist. Kiki was a child who would be very happy when she heard music and saw others dance. Such elegant and beautiful movements, if not for the fact that she was a little shy, mainly because there were too many people she did not know, she would have danced with her sisters. Poplar Fruit looked down at his daughter and smiled. Kiki also seemed to have sensed it. She turned her head and saw that her father had noticed her. The little girl blushed shyly. Poplar Fruit grinned and gave his daughter a thumbs up. Kiki hugged her father and giggled. However, the welcoming ceremony was not over yet. The village chief began to ask the fathers and children to go up and show off their talents to the Uyghur friends. The first to go up was Hero Hujun, who had been pushed out by Lu Yi. He did not have stage fright and openly danced a figure-8 dance. He even waved a grape headgear around. The audience felt as if they were watching a strange wizard performing a dance. Lu Yi did not want to be outdone. He also ran up and danced a duck dance. At this moment, the enthusiasm of the scene had been ignited. The fathers who used grapes to dress themselves up weirdly went up to perform their messy dances. Even Poplar Fruit pulled Zhou Shimin up and the two of them danced a few steps. 0 points for the posture, full points for the expression. Who asked Zhou Shimin to dress up as a woman to perform so ecstatically? The children also joined in one after another, and Chi-Chi had a lot of fun after blending in. Due to her excitement, her dancing was also very messy. She mixed up all kinds of square dances and folk dances together, and her demeanor as a little lady was completely lost. Haha. Poplar Fruit and the other fathers pointed at their children and laughed heartily. Such a joyous atmosphere was what they wanted when making a program. Alright, after sorting out their emotions and removing the cumbersome grape decorations, the fathers and children gathered again and prepared to begin the afternoon's game segment for the grape festival. What game should they play? The fathers looked at the village chief in anticipation. Pie babies. Look at the big box of ice cream, who wants to eat it? The village chief held up a box of ice cream. Instantly, the 6 children raised their heads and looked over. Their 12 eyes were as bright as torchlights in the dark as they stared straight at the prize in the village chief's hand. He didn't need to ask to know the answer. Good. Now the 5 dads, please stick your heads into that hole. Show me your head. The village chief pointed at a long table with red grapes on it. Poochie. Just now the fathers were still wondering what this table was for. They didn't expect it to be like this. Then the babies have to throw the grapes into their fathers' mouths. Whoever can throw the grapes into their fathers' mouths first will get to eat the ice cream. The village head finally finished the rules of the game. So that's how it was. This game was quite interesting. When the fathers popped their heads out of the holes, they realized that they were still about a meter away from their children. Throwing such a big grape into his father's mouth from so far away was not a small challenge. The village head shouted for the game to begin. There were still some children who were confused and didn't know how to play. Among them was Kiki. Kiki, come take a grape and throw it to your father. Poplar Fruit opened his mouth wide and explained to his daughter. Kiki's eyes lit up. She seemed to understand. The little girl stood on the small bench opposite them. Her white and tender little hand picked a grape and threw it over. Whoosh! The grape flew past Poplar Fruit's ear. Not bad, continue. Poplar Fruit smiled and encouraged his daughter. He thought that Kiki threw the grape askew. Rustle. Another few grapes brushed past Poplar Fruit, thousands of miles away from his mouth. Poplar Fruit finally realized that something was wrong. Although his daughter was looking at him, the moment she threw the grape, she looked to his left or right. Papa, we're about to win. The little girl happily said, we'll soon have ice cream to eat. How can you win? Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You didn't even throw it to your father. Kiki opened her mouth. Suddenly, the little girl covered her mouth with her 2 little hands and asked in surprise, are you going to throw it to Papa? Even if she was surprised, the little girl still had an innocent and cute look. Sure enough, it was just as he guessed. Kiki misunderstood. Otherwise, how could she throw so many grapes and not one of them landed on him? Poplar Fruit had to explain to his daughter again. This time, Poplar Fruit deliberately explained it very clearly. And you have to throw it into your father's mouth. But if you throw it to Papa, Papa will feel pain. Kiki frowned and said with some puzzlement. It's okay, grapes are so soft it won't hurt. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. I understand. Kiki's desire to fight rose. She pursed her small mouth and twisted her arms and wrists, just like how Poplar Fruit asked her to warm up when she practiced Benbenquan. The little girl became serious. Poplar Fruit looked at her. This was serious. He coughed twice and said, Kiki, you can't use too much strength. Kiki began a new round of attempts. Although the little girl smiled sweetly, she seriously waved her little hand and threw the grapes to her father. It's a little crooked. When you throw it, you have to turn it to the right a little bit. Poplar Fruit kept reminding his daughter. Of course, Kiki's performance was getting better and better. At the beginning, she could basically throw the grapes to her father's face. Ouch. Poplar Fruit smiled. Just now, his daughter almost threw it into his mouth and it just happened to hit Poplar Fruit's nose. Ouch. Hearing her father's cry, Kiki also cried out in pain as if she had felt it herself. She looked at her father nervously and asked with heartache, Papa, does it hurt? It's fine, let's continue. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. He looked at the few fathers beside him. The most pitiful one was Hujun. Kong Kong kept throwing things at his face as if it was a prank. Hujun's father cried out in pain. Compared to his daughter, he was simply a heating pad. Kiki's aim was getting better and better. Like Poplar Fruit, she had practiced martial arts and had better control of her body than the average child. The little girl began to throw a grape into Poplar Fruit's mouth, and more of them hit the mark. Actually, Poplar Fruit didn't care much about whether he threw it in or not. The main thing was that his daughter was very happy. Seeing her jump in joy after throwing one in, Poplar Fruit felt very happy. Cheers. Cheers. Poplar Fruit encouraged with a smile. But there was no time. 10. Zhou Shimin, who was next to them, suddenly shouted. Xianxian's reaction was even more intense. He jumped and screamed excitedly at the village chief. Yeah, we won. Yeah. Failed at the last step. Chapter 1289. Lin Yongjian was the most pitiful one. He and Dejun cooperated very well this time. They had already eaten 9 grapes, but they couldn't eat the last one no matter how hard they tried. In the end, they lost the competition. Kiki felt a little regretful. She had just found the feeling. The game ended. It's okay, we'll win the next round. Poplar Fruit smiled, rubbed his daughter's head and said, You're already very good. I think I like this game very much. Kiki took her father's hand and said happily, And I can throw it very accurately. Of course you can throw it into the hollow. You're definitely a sharpshooter. Poplar Fruit gave his daughter a thumbs up. At this time Xian began to open his prize. Hao and Dejun also went over to look. This ice cream was very attractive to children. Xian. Hey. Zhou Shimin stopped Xian, who was about to eat. On one hand he wanted him to share first. On the other hand, Zhou Shimin winked at his son and said, First give that. That who? Of course it was Xian's favorite sister, Kiki. Xian understood. He scooped a spoonful of ice cream and put it in front of Kiki's mouth. Kiki happily ate it and then softly said, Thank you. Little chubby Xian calmly turned his head and walked back, but it was obvious that he was happy. As if encouraged, Xian loudly continued to distribute the ice cream to his friends. After eating a little ice cream, Kiki was satisfied. However, she still couldn't forget the game just now. Kong Kong wobbled and crawled under the table. She stuck her head out of the hole and experienced what her father had experienced earlier. Kiki saw it and happily ran over. She stood on the small bench and smiled sweetly at Kong Kong. Brother Kong Kong, I'll play with you, okay? You throw it. Chairman Kong said as if his words were gold. Open your mouth. The little girl pinched a grape and looked at it. She smiled happily. Kong Kong's mouth was wide open, but her eyes were fixed on Kiki. Her sister's smile was very beautiful. This time, Kiki got the hang of it after throwing it twice and successfully threw it into Big Brother Kong Kong's mouth. The siblings looked at each other and smiled knowingly. The girl giggled brightly while the boy smiled faintly. This scene was as beautiful as a painting. The second round of the competition was more complicated. First, the dads had to stand on the ice and scramble to finish the bunch of grapes in their hands. Standing on the ice, even poplar fruit sucked in a breath of cold air. It's so cold. Most importantly, it was the difference in temperature. It was midsummer in Turpan. Just a moment ago they were standing on the hot floor. Now they were stepping on a block of ice that was emitting cold air. Only those who had experienced it personally could understand this feeling. Papa, you can do it. Kiki didn't know what to do. She waved her small arms and cheered for her father. Poplar Fruit, who quickly recovered, stabilized his body. The ice was very slippery. He said to his daughter, "Go over there and wait for Papa's order. Then go and pick the best tools to make the grape juice." Seeing that the other dads had already started eating, Poplar Fruit also hurriedly took action. Needless to say, Poplar Fruit's performance wasn't bad. He ate the grapes quickly, unlike the other dads who ate while complaining that the grapes were cold. Under the cameras filming, Poplar Fruit rarely worked so hard. He sucked in the grapes like a storm. His mouth was stuffed full of grapes. Every time he chewed, the green grape juice overflowed from the corner of his mouth. This was too funny. The audience, especially Poplar Fruit's fans, lamented, "My appa, why do you not care about your image?" Finally, Poplar Fruit was the first to finish the battle. However, just as he desperately swallowed the grapes, Lin Yongjian had already finished speaking the tongue twister vaguely and asked Dejun, who was still in a daze, to pick up the tools. Poplar Fruit didn't want to be outdone. He clearly finished the tongue twister. Poplar Fruit couldn't sing, but for Poplar Fruit, who was about to get a doctorate in Chinese, it was absolutely easy for him to recite the tongue twister. However, he didn't care about this. He hurriedly ordered his daughter to pick the tools to make the grapes. In fact, the tools to make the grapes were also very strange. There were sticks the size of 2 index fingers, spatulas, and even small spoons and chopsticks. The sticks were the best. Kiki picked them herself. In the end, she picked a small spoon. She didn't know which one was better. She wasted the good opportunity that her father fought so hard for. Alright, Poplar Fruit didn't care too much. He instructed his daughter to squat by the wooden basin and use the spoon to make the grapes. However, seeing his daughter make the grapes one by one, Poplar Fruit looked up at the sky. She was going to do it until the sun went down. Luckily, the frivolous Lu Yi suddenly thought of a good idea. He shouted, "Nuyi, stand on it and step on it." Nuyi obediently did, as he didn't even take off his shoes. He just stood on it with his 2 feet. Wait a moment. What's wrong? Didn't the village chief say it just now? In the end, they had to make a cup of grape juice and let the father drink it. Wouldn't Lu Yi end up drinking grape juice mixed with sand? However, all of a sudden, this made the other father's thoughts become active. "Kiki, take off your shoes. Stand on it." Poplar Fruit first covered the grapes with a filter cloth, allowing the grapes to curl into a ball. Then he let his daughter hold his shoulder and took off her shoes, revealing her fair and clean feet. They stepped on it one after the other. "Will it stink?" Kiki held her father's hand and stepped on it one by one. She giggled to herself. "Let me smell." In order to make the show more interesting, Poplar Fruit really let his daughter raise one of her feet. Then he moved his face closer and sniffed. "It doesn't stink. Daddy washed your feet for you in the afternoon." It was really smart. He was even praising himself. However, it also amused the girl so much that she couldn't stop laughing. She laughed until her feet lost strength. As the father and daughter played, they forgot about the competition. In the end, first place was snatched away by Lu Yi. Of course, Poplar Fruit let his daughter work hard and was the second to stand on the ice cube. Gulp, gulp. Poplar Fruit finished the glass of grape juice in big gulps. "Papa, is it good?" Kiki, who was next to him, asked curiously as she respectfully helped her drunk father down. "It's good. It's the taste of your feet soaked in grapes, Kiki. It's sour and refreshing, delicious." Poplar Fruit couldn't help but laugh. The little girl also giggled. This time she understood her father's subtext, but she also felt that it was fun, so she was half shy and half happy as she hugged her father's thigh and laughed. Of course, the other fathers hadn't finished yet. Their spirit of participating in the competition for the second place continued. Poplar Fruit didn't even need to teach them. Kiki couldn't help but run over to help. Today, Teacher Lin, Brother Zhou, both of you drank Kiki's feet. How do you feel? Poplar Fruit was the last to go up and put his arms around the shoulders of his two big brothers, laughing mischievously. Haha. Chapter 1290. Having lost the competition once again, Kiki felt a little regretful. That was because it was just a hair's breadth away. If she had worked harder, she could have gotten first place. However, luckily, the little girl's participation and enthusiasm to help her friends lessened her regret. Poplar Fruit also comforted his daughter. It's fine. In the next round, let's strive to get first place and win the ice cream. Kiki nodded. She licked the ice cream that Nui had given her and said to her father, I really like to eat ice cream. The third round of the game was to eat grapes while blindfolded. This was not shown in the program, but it was indeed there. The rules were that the children had to be blindfolded. Under the instructions of their fathers, they had to fumble around and eat the hidden red grapes in a bunch of hanging green grapes. Of course, the fathers also had a task. They had to bend down and raise their heads to eat a bunch of grapes that were about the same height as the grapes that their children were eating. Bend down in a standard posture. Your hands cannot touch the ground. Otherwise, you will be punished by us Uyghur ladies. The village chief pointed at a Uyghur beauty holding a water gun and chuckled. It's fine, it's fine. Poplar Fruit smiled and said to his daughter, this is what your dad is good at. He did a demonstration. He pushed his legs on the ground and bent his body backwards. As he bent, he actually formed an inverted U shape and used his hands to grab onto his thighs. Holy shit. The audience expressed their confusion. Was this the flexibility a human should have? Let's not talk about a normal person leaning backwards. Even if they had to bend their head forward, lean against their knees and hug their ankles with their hands, this was already a huge challenge. Out of 100 people, probably not many could do this. Poplar Fruit was actually able to flip upside down. Wouldn't his waist break? Everyone was scared witless. Lee even screamed like a little girl. Of course, it wasn't that no one could do this. Some top dancers could do it, but these people were very rare. Furthermore, they were mostly girls. Their bodies were already as soft as a snake. Poplar Fruit had exceeded everyone's imagination. We have to win this time. Kiki raised her little arms happily and threw herself into her father's arms. Poplar Fruit gave her a lot of confidence. After wrapping the cloth around the little girl's eyes, Kiki reached out to hold her father's hand. Then she stuck out her little tongue and said happily, Papa, I can't see. It's okay if you can't see. Daddy will be your eyes. Poplar Fruit pinched his daughter's little nose with a smile and said, later, Dad will tell you where to go and how far to go. You just follow Dad's instructions, okay? Kiki nodded obediently. That was what he said, but it wasn't easy at all to do it. The blindfolded little girl was like a lost deer. After leaving her father's hand, she couldn't find her way. Left, no, turn right, yes, go 2 steps, no, 5 steps. In fact, Poplar Fruit wasn't the only one who was as busy as ants on a hot pan. The other fathers were also running around in circles like children. It wasn't that the fathers were nervous, but that they didn't cooperate with their children as well as they thought. For example, when they told them to go left, the children would turn around in a daze and couldn't find their way. Poplar Fruit's face was blooming with a smile. Kiki was so interesting. No matter how the game was, the performance of I Am Your Eyes with his daughter was very funny. When Yonghua told her to take 2 steps, the little girl hesitated and took 2 very small steps, unable to let go. Then when Yonghua got used to her daughter's pace and told her to take 5 steps, the little girl walked and walked and walked, and the steps became bigger again. It was uncoordinated, but it was very funny. Poplar Fruit was so happy that he patted his thigh and forgot to give his daughter instructions. Playing. Yonghua turned pale with fright and hurriedly rushed forward. Just now, when Poplar Fruit turned his head, Kiki bumped into the wooden pillar in a daze. If it was just a light bump, Poplar Fruit wouldn't be so anxious, but from the sound it was obvious that it wasn't a light bump. Woo! Poplar Fruit caught his daughter and didn't let her fall to the ground, but the little girl was already panicking. After being hugged by her father, the little girl began to cry. How are you? Are you okay? The other fathers asked with concern. I'm fine. It's a little red. Poplar Fruit gently lifted his daughter's bangs to take a look. It was indeed a little red, but fortunately the skin wasn't broken. Poplar Fruit smiled and said to the other fathers, "You guys continue." Looking at Kiki's crying state, he knew that the father and daughter could not participate in this competition. In order not to interfere with the other children's competition, he carried his daughter to the back and looked for the program's doctor. He didn't think that his daughter was so delicate that everyone had to stop to serve her just because she fell and bumped. In the past, when Poplar Fruit was in the countryside, the children were raced freely and ran around without shoes. When they fell, they patted the soil and stood up by themselves. How could they be like the children in the city now? All of them were the pearls of their families. Their parents couldn't bear to scold them, and they didn't want the teachers to discipline their children. How could they be successful if they were spoiled? It's okay, it's okay. Don't cry. Poplar Fruit smiled and coaxed his daughter, saying, "It's just a bump. Our Kiki is the strongest. Don't cry, don't cry." Kiki's crying gradually stopped. She was in her father's arms and pursed her lips, but her little hands were still hugging her father's neck. "Does it still hurt?" Poplar Fruit gently touched his daughter's forehead. This red and swollen area was sprayed with some medicine. He said apologetically, "It's Dad's fault. I didn't take good care of you. Still hurts a little." The little girl's mood calmed down a little. She leaned close to her father's ear and said softly, just now it was so scary. I couldn't see and then I bumped into it." Chi-Chi's voice was faint, and there was a hint of lingering fear in it. Poplar Fruit suddenly realized. He smiled and held his daughter's little hand in his big hand and asked, "So, Kiki cried just now not because of the pain, right?" Kiki pursed her lips and nodded. She thought about how she felt just now. She felt wronged and scared and wanted to cry. "It's okay. After we bumped into it once, we'll know in the future." Poplar Fruit gently smiled. His right hand was still brushing his daughter's bangs, while his left hand helped the weeping girl wipe her tears. "Get out of the way." Suddenly, Kong Kang's cold voice came from outside the crowd. Poplar Fruit, who was sitting in the photography group's gathering place to comfort his daughter, raised his head and saw Kong Kong walking over from the crowd. When the little boy came closer, he didn't have that cold and indifferent look from before. Instead, he looked a little nervous. Chapter 1291. Kong Kong won the third round of the competition. He got the ice cream from the village chief, but he didn't open it immediately. Instead, he walked straight to where Kiki and her father were. Kong Kong didn't forget that when he pulled down the cloth covering his eyes, he saw Kiki in her father's arms. His sister's forehead was red and swollen and she was crying like a kitten. Her pitiful appearance was heartbreaking. Later on, Kong Kong would occasionally pay attention to his sister who was surrounded by the crowd. Although Chi-Chi stopped crying later on, Kong Kong was still a little worried. As a result, Kong Kong didn't look very happy when her father won. Poplar Fruit looked up and saw Kong Kong walking in. He smiled and nudged his daughter, saying, "Kiki, look, brother Kong Kong is here to visit you." Kong Kong saw his sister turn around. Her cheeks were wet and her eyes were red. She looked so pitiful. His cold aura disappeared and was replaced by a nervous pout. "Put this on your head and chill it." Kong Kong walked over and held up the prize he just won. He put it on Kiki's forehead. "Wow, Kong Kong, you're so nice. You put ice cream on Kiki's wound." Poplar Fruit praised with a smile. "Uncle thinks you're great." Kiki was still in a daze. However, the coldness that came from his forehead did lessen the initial pain by quite a bit. "Here, I'll hold it. You eat it." Poplar Fruit helped Kong Kong hold the ice cream on Kiki's forehead. Kong Kong quickly removed the plastic packaging on the wooden spoon and opened the ice cream. He dug out a piece and fed it to Kiki. Kong Kong said simply, "You eat first." Kiki's vision was blocked, so she couldn't see Kong Kong. She opened her mouth and took a sip of the ice cream. The cold ice cream was sweet, and it was as if the sweetness had reached her heart. "Thank you, brother Kong Kong." Kiki's voice was soft. She didn't choke up anymore and her voice became clear and pleasant. "You eat too." Poplar Fruit did not finish his sentence. Kong Kong then turned the wooden spoon around and used her small head to scoop a spoonful for herself. Next, his movements were very nimble. He flipped the bowl again and took a spoonful from Big Head to feed Kiki. Poplar Fruit was dumbfounded. It was hard to believe that such a young child could be so meticulous. He didn't know if it was because the ice pack had alleviated the pain or because she had forgotten the pain after eating the ice cream, but the little girl was in a good mood again. Seeing his daughter bouncing back to the square with Big Brother Kong Kong to play, Yongguo's lips curled up. He suddenly felt a little emotional about these children's youthful innocence and cuteness. Kong is awesome. Poplar Fruit did not follow them. He was interviewed by the director in front of the camera. He smiled and gave a thumbs up, saying, "Did you notice that Kong Kong used one side of the spoon to feed Kiki, and then ate himself with the other side of the spoon? Very attentive and considerate." Poplar Fruit praised. "He's only 6 years old. This is amazing." Poplar Fruit liked Kong Kong's character so much because he was the same type of person as Kong Kong. Both of them are Scorpios. Poplar Fruit was the same. He was also very attentive and considerate to the person he liked. In his opinion, a real good man should be like Kong Kong. Dinner was very sumptuous and everyone ate happily. However, Kiki was a little special. She didn't eat mutton, so she didn't have many choices. "Do you want to try the mutton skewers?" Poplar Fruit smiled and put the mutton skewers in front of the little girl's nose, but Kiki shook her head firmly. "Hey, I won't eat it." Poplar Fruit didn't care. Everyone had something they didn't like to eat. Kiki didn't eat mutton or spicy food, but beef fried rice was okay as long as she was full. Everyone thought that Kiki was unhappy, so the fathers came to comfort the little girl. "Poplar Fruit, I heard from Teacher Lin that your house is like this. How can you live in such a place?" Lu Yi moved over and patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder. "How about you and Kiki sleep in my house together?" Afraid that Poplar Fruit didn't understand, he smiled and said, "Our big bed is from here to there. Super big and it can fit more than 10 people. Poplar Fruit smiled and didn't answer. Beside him, Moi also came over and invited his good friend Kiki. "Kiki, how about you sleep in our house tonight? We can play together." Poplar Fruit lowered his head to see how his daughter would answer. "No, I want to be with Daddy tonight." Kiki giggled. "Let's play together tomorrow after we wake up, okay?" "No, Kiki, listen to Uncle. Your house is too shabby. At night the wind will blow and it will be very cold. Uncle's house is very big. You can do somersaults on the bed." Lu Yi personally explained. "You can come over with your father." Kiki subconsciously looked at her father, wanting him to make a decision. "Do you want to go?" Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. Poplar Fruit was actually thinking about whether to go or not. After all, Kiki was a girl. Poplar Fruit couldn't bear to let his daughter endure such a harsh environment. But he hoped that his daughter would be with him and not run away after being invited by her friends. Under such complicated thoughts, Poplar Fruit decided to let his daughter make the decision. "I don't really want to go." Kiki pulled her father's hand, raised her head and waved. "I want to stay in our tree house and watch the stars." The little girl's face was full of anticipation, as if she could see a fairy tale fairyland in front of her. Poplar Fruit laughed. He looked at Lu Yi and said, "Then let's call it a night." Poplar Fruit was actually bursting with joy and was even a little smug. He was extremely satisfied with his daughter's performance. Only now did he realize that even if the environment was difficult, he still hoped that his daughter would stay and spend it with him. Nono was not discouraged. He turned around and went to look for Brother Kong Kong. However, Brother Kong Kong also rejected his invitation. "Brother Nono, let's play together tomorrow, okay?" Kiki saw that her good friend was repeatedly rejected and was a little depressed. She went up to him and said, "We can play together in the morning again." "Alright then. I want to see Princess Iron Fan tomorrow," Nono said. "I want to see her too." Kiki nodded happily and said, "I haven't seen Princess Iron Fan yet. She's very beautiful. She said she wants to be good friends with me, but I'm embarrassed. Do you think she's beautiful or I'm beautiful? Do you think she's beautiful or I'm beautiful? Hey, look. Isn't that a bird? What a high EQ young man. He actually knows how to change the topic. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.